When a blizzard forces sworn enemies into one room, a fake engagement becomes their only shield. But the real danger isn't the storm outside. Cassandra Merritt never imagined she'd be trapped in a frontier inn with Nathaniel Ashford, the ruthless landowner who's been her adversary for years. When a brutal winter storm leaves them stranded with only one room available, Nathaniel makes a calculated decision that changes everything. They'll pretend to be engaged to protect her reputation. But as the storm rages and a dangerous rival begins circling, Cass discovers that surviving the cold is nothing compared to surviving him. Will their lie become their salvation or their destruction? Stay with us until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so we can see how far this story travels. The carriage lurched violently to the left, and Cass's shoulder slammed into the wooden frame hard enough to make her teeth rattle. Outside, the wind screamed like something wounded and furious, hurling snow against the windows in sheets so thick she couldn't see 3 feet beyond the glass. "Hold on!" The driver's voice barely cut through the howl of the blizzard. Cass gripped the leather strap above her head, her knuckles white. Across from her, Nathaniel Ashford sat with that infuriating composure he always wore, one hand braced against the ceiling, the other steady on his knee. Even now, with death potentially seconds away, he looked like he was sitting in his own damn parlor. She hated him for it. The carriage tilted again, this time harder. The world spun. Cass felt herself sliding, heard Nathaniel curse, which was so unlike him it almost shocked her more than the crash itself. And then his hand shot out and caught her wrist, yanking her back just as the whole carriage tipped onto 2 wheels. For one terrible, suspended moment, they hung there. Cass's heart hammered against her ribs. She could see it in Nathaniel's eyes too, just a flicker, genuine fear. Then the carriage slammed back down with a bone-jarring crash that knocked the air from her lungs. The driver was shouting something. The horses screamed. And then, mercifully, they stopped moving. Cass sat there, breathing hard, still feeling Nathaniel's grip on her wrist. He released her abruptly, like he'd just realized he was touching her. "Are you hurt?" His voice was clipped, formal. "Back to normal. I'm fine." She wasn't sure if that was true, but she'd be damned if she'd show weakness in front of him. The driver wrenched open the door, snow and wind exploding into the small space. "We can't go on. There's an inn maybe 1/4 mile back. We passed it just before the road gave out. We'll have to walk." Nathaniel nodded once, already reaching for his coat. "Then we walk." Cass wanted to argue. Arguing with Nathaniel Ashford was practically reflex at this point. But the alternative was freezing to death in a broken carriage on a mountain pass. So she pulled her cloak tight and climbed out into hell. The cold hit her like a physical blow. The wind tore at her clothes, found every gap, every opening. Snow stung her face. She couldn't see the road, couldn't see anything except white and more white. And somewhere in that white was Nathaniel's broad back as he pushed forward. She followed because there was nothing else to do. The 1/4 mile felt like 10. Her feet went numb first, then her hands, then her face. She stopped feeling the cold after a while, which she knew was bad, knew was dangerous, but her thoughts were getting sluggish and slow. 1 foot in front of the other. That was all that mattered. 1 foot, then another. When Nathaniel's hand closed around her elbow, she almost jerked away out of pure habit. "Stay close," he said, his mouth near her ear so she could hear him over the wind. "The inn's just ahead." She wanted to tell him she could see it herself, but she couldn't, actually. Everything was white and blurred, and her eyes wouldn't focus properly, so she let him guide her, hating every second of it. The inn materialized out of the storm like salvation, a low, sturdy building with light glowing in the windows and smoke rising from the chimney. The driver reached it first and pounded on the door. It opened. Heat and light spilled out. Cass stumbled inside and nearly wept at the warmth. The common room was packed. Travelers, traders, a few rough-looking men who might have been trappers, or might have been worse, all stranded by the same storm. Every eye turned toward them as they entered, dripping and half-frozen. The innkeeper, a broad-shouldered woman with iron-gray hair, pushed through the crowd. "You're lucky you made it. Storm's only getting worse. I've got 1 room left, but—" She looked between Cass and Nathaniel, her gaze sharp and assessing. "Just 1. Cass's stomach dropped. "That's not—" she started, but Nathaniel cut her off. "We'll take it." His hand was still on her elbow, firm and unyielding. She turned to stare at him. "Excuse me?" "The room." he said calmly, like he was discussing the weather. We'll take it. Like hell we will. Cass jerked her arm free. I'd rather sleep in the common room. The innkeeper's expression shifted, something knowing and almost pitying entering her eyes. Wouldn't recommend that, miss. Rough crowd tonight. Not all of them. Gentlemen, if you take my meaning. Cass followed her gaze. Several of the men were watching her with an interest that made her skin crawl. One of them smiled, and it wasn't friendly. Nathaniel stepped closer, positioning himself between her and the room. When he spoke, his voice was low enough that only she could hear. Use your head, Cassandra. Look around. You see any other women here? She did look. The innkeeper, that was it. Everyone else was male, and at least half of them looked like they'd slit your throat for a warm meal. One night in a shared room, Nathaniel continued, still in that maddeningly reasonable tone, or one night out here with them. Your choice. She wanted to hit him, wanted to storm out into the blizzard just to prove she didn't need his protection. But she wasn't stupid, and she wasn't suicidal. Fine, she bit out, but you sleep on the floor. Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. Naturally. The innkeeper was still waiting, watching them with that sharp, evaluating gaze. Cass realized with creeping dread what this must look like. A man and a woman, traveling together but arguing about sharing a room. We'll need... Nathaniel started, but the innkeeper interrupted. Your wife shy about propriety? There was an edge to the question, a test. Nathaniel didn't miss a beat. My fiancée. And yes, she takes propriety seriously, as do I. The word fiancé hit Cass like a slap. She opened her mouth to correct him, to set the record straight, but his hand found her elbow again and squeezed, hard. Isn't that right, darling? His eyes locked on hers, and there was a warning in them, cold and clear. For a long, frozen moment, Cass stood there on the knife's edge of decision. She could expose the lie right now, tell the truth. But the truth was complicated and messy, and this room full of strangers wouldn't care about the nuances of why she and Nathaniel Ashford were traveling the same road at the same time. They'd draw their own conclusions, and those conclusions would ruin her. In frontier towns like this, reputation was currency. Lose it, and you lost everything. She forced her lips into something resembling a smile. Of course. My apologies, dear. The cold has me out of sorts. The innkeeper's expression relaxed. Ah, well, that's understandable. Congratulations to you both. Let me show you to your room. As they followed her up the narrow stairs, Cass leaned close to Nathaniel and hissed, What the hell do you think you're doing? Saving your reputation, he murmured back. You're welcome. I didn't ask you to. You didn't have to. Unlike you, I think before I act. She wanted to shove him down the stairs, wanted to scream at him that she didn't need saving, didn't need his arrogant, high-handed protection. But the innkeeper was opening a door, gesturing them inside, and there was nothing to do but follow. The room was small. A single bed dominated the space, along with a washstand, a chair, and a narrow window currently being battered by snow and wind. It was clean, at least, and warm from the fire crackling in the small hearth. I'll have hot water sent up, the innkeeper said, and supper in an hour. You'll want to get out of those wet clothes before you catch your death. Then she left, closing the door behind her with a soft click that sounded unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. Cass stood in the middle of the room, dripping onto the wooden floor, and tried to process what had just happened. Tried to understand how, in the span of 10 minutes, she'd gone from freezing in a blizzard to sharing a room and a fake engagement with Nathaniel Ashford. This is insane, she said finally. Nathaniel was already removing his snow-covered coat, hanging it near the fire to dry. This is practical. Practical? You just told that woman we're engaged. Yes. And now you have a room, a bed, and your reputation intact. You should be thanking me. Thanking you? Cass laughed, and it came out sharp and bitter. You didn't do this for me. You did it because it was convenient, because it was easy. You always take the path that makes you look like the hero. He turned to face her, and for just a second, something flickered in his expression, something that might have been anger or might have been hurt. Believe what you want. The lie stands. Unless you'd like to go downstairs right now and explain to everyone that we're not actually engaged, that we're just two people who happen to despise each other and got caught in the same storm. Cass bit her lip. He was right, and she hated that he was right. One night, she said firmly. One night, and then when the storm clears, we go our separate ways and we never speak of this again. Agreed. And you sleep on the floor. I already said I would. And you don't... She hesitated, trying to find the words. You don't touch me. You don't come near me. We stay on opposite sides of this room. Something cold passed over Nathaniel's face. I'm not in the habit of forcing myself on unwilling women, Cassandra. You're safe from me. You always have been. The words stung more than they should have. There was a distance in his voice, a finality that felt like a door slamming shut. Fine, she said. Good. Good. They stood there staring at each other across the small room, and the silence stretched out between them like a chasm. A knock at the door broke the tension. A young girl entered with a basin of hot water, setting it on the washstand before disappearing again without a word. You should clean up, Nathaniel said, turning back to the fire. Change into something dry. I'll step outside. You don't have to. I'm going to check on the driver and the horses. I'll be back in 20 minutes. Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with that same soft, final click. Cass stood alone in the room, listening to the storm rage outside and trying to ignore the way her hands were shaking. From cold, she told herself, just from cold. She peeled off her wet clothes, shivering violently, and washed as quickly as she could with the hot water. Her spare dress was damp but not soaked, and she pulled it on gratefully, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders for extra warmth. The bed looked impossibly inviting. She hadn't realized how exhausted she was until she sat down on the edge of it, felt the softness give beneath her weight. She could sleep for a week, but she couldn't. Not yet. Not until she figured out how she was going to survive the next 12 hours locked in a room with Nathaniel Ashford. They'd been enemies for 3 years now, ever since he'd bought up half the land surrounding her family's property and then tried to pressure her father into selling. When her father refused, Nathaniel had turned to other tactics, subtle, legal, perfectly respectable ways of making their lives difficult, redirecting water rights, challenging boundary lines. Always just within the letter of the law, never quite crossing the line into outright cruelty. He was infuriating, cold, calculating, utterly without mercy when it came to getting what he wanted, and now she was supposed to pretend to be engaged to him. The door opened. Nathaniel stepped back inside, snow dusting his dark hair. He'd taken off his expensive coat, was down to his shirt sleeves now, and Cass found herself noticing, against her will, how the thin fabric clung to his shoulders, his arms. She looked away quickly. Driver's got the horses settled, Nathaniel said, moving to the fire. Carriage is damaged but repairable. We'll be stuck here at least until the storm passes. Could be 2 days, could be more. 2 days. Cass's stomach sank. Wonderful, she muttered. Nathaniel glanced at her, and for a moment something almost like sympathy crossed his face. I know this isn't ideal. That's an understatement. But we'll manage. We're both adults. We can be civil for a few days. Can we? The words came out sharper than she intended. When have we ever been civil to each other? He was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was different. Softer, maybe. Or just tired. We could start now. Cass looked at him, really looked at him. He was standing with his back to the fire, his face half in shadow, and she realized with a strange jolt that she'd never seen him like this before. Not dressed down, not weary, not human. It was unsettling. Why did you do it? She asked suddenly. Why did you tell them we were engaged? You could have just gotten us separate rooms, or there was only one room. He said it like it was obvious. So? You could have taken it for yourself, left me to deal with the common room on my own. No. The word came out flat, absolute. I couldn't. Why not? He met her eyes, and there was something in his gaze she couldn't read. Because I'm not a monster, Cassandra, despite what you think of me. The words hung in the air between them. Before Cass could respond, another knock sounded at the door. This time it was a boy with a tray of food, bread, cheese, some kind of stew that smelled better than anything had a right to smell. They ate in silence, sitting on opposite sides of the small table by the window. Outside, the storm continued to howl. Inside, the fire crackled and popped. We need to discuss the story, Nathaniel said finally, setting down his spoon. Cass looked up. Story? Our engagement. If we're going to maintain this fiction, we need to be consistent. People will ask questions. Right. Cass hadn't thought that far ahead. So what do we tell them? Nathaniel considered. Keep it simple. We've been courting for several months. Kept it quiet because of business complications. Business complications, Cass repeated dryly. That's one way to put we hate each other. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Precisely. We'll say we were traveling together to visit your aunt or my family or my aunt, Cass interrupted. In Millbrook. That's believable. I do have an aunt there. Fine. We were traveling to Millbrook to inform your aunt of our engagement when the storm caught us. He paused. When did I propose? Does it matter? Details matter. If someone asks you, you need to have an answer. Cass sighed. This was getting more complicated by the second. Fine. 2 weeks ago. You proposed 2 weeks ago. Where? In your study. Very romantic. She couldn't keep the sarcasm out of her voice. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. This only works if you can sell it, Cassandra. If you act like this around other people. I know how to act, she snapped. I'm not an idiot. I never said you were. You implied it. I implied that you're angry, which you are. And anger makes people careless. Don't lecture me about... A burst of laughter from downstairs cut her off. Male voices, rough and loud. The sound of chairs scraping, boots on wood. Nathaniel rose and went to the door, checking the lock. We should get some rest. It's going to be a long few days. Cass wanted to keep arguing, but exhaustion was pulling at her like a physical weight. Fine, but I'm taking the bed. I already said you could. And you're staying on your side of the room. Cassandra. He turned to face her, and there was something almost weary in his expression. I have no interest in anything of that nature with you. You're safe. I promise. The words should have been reassuring. Instead, they felt vaguely insulting, though Cass couldn't articulate why. Fine, she said again. Good. She climbed into bed, pulling the rough blankets up to her chin. Nathaniel settled into the chair by the fire, stretching his long legs out in front of him. It looked uncomfortable as hell. You could take some of the blankets, Cass heard herself say. For the floor. He glanced at her, surprise flickering across his face. I'm fine. You're going to freeze. I said I'm fine. Stubborn bastard. Cass rolled over, presenting him with her back, and closed her eyes. But sleep didn't come. She lay there, listening to the storm and the fire and the creaking of Nathaniel's chair every time he shifted position. Her mind kept spinning, replaying the day's events, trying to make sense of how everything had gone so wrong so fast. Engaged to Nathaniel Ashford. Even fake, it was absurd. Impossible. And yet here they were. Cassandra? His voice came out of the darkness, quiet. What? A pause. Nothing. Never mind. She waited, but he didn't say anything else. Eventually, the exhaustion won, and she drifted into an uneasy sleep. She woke to voices outside the door. At first, she thought she was dreaming, but no. There were definitely people in the hallway, talking in low, urgent tones. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear enough. Argumentative, tense. Cass sat up, her heart suddenly pounding. The room was dark, except for the dying embers of the fire. She couldn't see Nathaniel in the chair. He was standing by the door, completely still, listening. What's happening? She whispered. He held up a hand for silence. The voices outside grew louder, angrier, then footsteps retreating down the hall. Nathaniel waited another long moment before moving away from the door. Fight over cards, probably, he said quietly. Nothing to worry about. But he didn't sit back down. He stayed near the door, watchful. Cass pulled the blankets tighter around herself. This place is a powder keg. Yes. All the more reason to keep up the fiction. Yes. She studied him in the dim light. You really think this will work? It has to. He finally looked at her, his face shadowed. Because if it doesn't, Cassandra, you're ruined. You understand that, don't you? If anyone finds out the truth, that we spent multiple nights alone together, unchaperoned, your reputation is finished, engagement or no engagement. I know, she said quietly. Do you? He took a step closer. Because I don't think you understand what that means out here. This isn't the city. This is the frontier. A woman's reputation is everything. Lose it, and you might as well be dead. I said I know. Her voice came out harder than she intended. Stop treating me like a child. Then stop acting like one. The words stung. Cass felt heat rise in her cheeks. Get out. What? Get out of this room. Now. Nathaniel stared at her like she'd lost her mind. It's the middle of the night. In case you hadn't noticed, there's still a blizzard outside. I don't care. I can't. She broke off, surprised by the sudden tightness in her throat. I can't be in here with you right now. Something shifted in his expression. Cassandra, don't. She held up a hand. Just don't. You've made your point. I'm a reckless child who doesn't understand the world. Fine. You win. But I don't want to hear another word from you tonight. For a long moment, he just looked at her. Then he nodded slowly and moved back to his chair by the fire. The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. Cass lay back down, her eyes burning. She told herself it was from exhaustion, from stress, not from the crushing weight of knowing that he was right. Outside, the storm continued to rage. Morning came gray and cold. Cass woke to find Nathaniel already awake, standing by the window and looking out at the snow-covered landscape. Still coming down, he said without turning around. We're not going anywhere today. Cass rubbed her eyes and sat up. Her whole body ached from tension and poor sleep. Wonderful. There's fresh water in the basin. I had it brought up while you were sleeping. It was a small kindness, and it caught her off guard. Thank you. He just nodded. They got ready in tense silence, taking turns with the washstand, carefully maintaining their distance. When they finally went downstairs for breakfast, Cass was acutely aware of every eye that turned their way. The common room was even more crowded than it had been the night before. More travelers had arrived, seeking shelter from the storm. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of unwashed bodies and wet wool. The innkeeper waved them over to a small table near the kitchen. Morning. How did you two sleep? Very well, thank you, Nathaniel said smoothly, pulling out a chair for Cass. She sat, trying not to flinch at the casual gesture. They were supposed to be engaged. Engaged couples did things like this. Breakfast was porridge and hard bread, but it was hot and filling. Cass ate mechanically, hyper-aware of Nathaniel beside her, of the way people kept glancing their way. Then she saw him, a man at the far end of the room, watching them with open interest. He was handsome in a rakish sort of way, with dark hair and an easy smile. But there was something calculating in his eyes that made Cass's skin prickle. As if sensing her gaze, the man rose and made his way over to their table. Forgive the intrusion, he said, his voice smooth as honey. Victor Calder. I couldn't help but notice you two last night. Newly engaged, I heard. Nathaniel's expression went carefully blank. That's right. Congratulations. Victor's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. Romantic, getting trapped in a storm together. Almost like fate, isn't it? There was something pointed in the way he said it. Cass felt Nathaniel tense beside her. Something like that, Nathaniel said evenly. Victor's gaze slid to Cass, and she fought the urge to shrink back. You're a lucky woman, Miss Merritt, Cass said, finding her voice. Cassandra Merritt. Merritt. Victor's eyes lit up with recognition. Any relation to Thomas Merritt? Owns that land up near the ridge? Cass's stomach tightened. He's my father. Interesting. Victor glanced at Nathaniel, then back to her. And you're marrying Nathaniel Ashford. Very interesting indeed. There was a weight to those words, an implication that Cass didn't like. Before she could respond, Nathaniel stood. If you'll excuse us, Mr. Calder, my fiancé and I have some matters to discuss. Of course, of course. Victor stepped back, but his smile never wavered. I'm sure we'll have plenty of time to get acquainted. After all, none of us are going anywhere for a while. He walked away, but Cass could feel his eyes on them even after he returned to his seat. Who is he? She whispered to Nathaniel. Trouble. Nathaniel's jaw was tight. The kind of man who makes his living finding leverage over others and exploiting it. You think he suspects something? I think he's smart enough to know that the timing of our engagement is convenient. He's going to probe, test the story. We need to be careful. Cass's appetite vanished. She pushed her bowl away. This is getting more complicated. Yes. Nathaniel was watching Victor across the room. It is. They spent the rest of the morning in their room, ostensibly to avoid the crowds, but really to avoid Victor's too knowing gaze. The storm showed no signs of letting up. If anything, it seemed to be getting worse. By afternoon, the walls of the small room felt like they were closing in. Cass paced, restless and anxious. Nathaniel sat in his chair reading a book he'd borrowed from the innkeeper, infuriatingly calm. "I can't just sit here," Cass said finally. "I'm going insane." Nathaniel looked up. "What do you suggest?" "I don't know. Something. Anything." He closed the book. "We could go downstairs, play the part. The more normal we act, the less suspicious we'll seem." "You mean socialize with those people? Would you prefer to stay locked in here for the next 2 days?" Cass bit her lip. He had a point. "Fine. But if that Victor person comes near me again, he won't." There was steel in Nathaniel's voice. "I'll make sure of it." They went downstairs together, and this time Nathaniel took her hand. The touch was electric, completely unexpected. Cass almost jerked away before remembering herself. They were engaged. Engaged couples held hands. His palm was warm and dry against hers, his grip firm but not constraining. She told herself the flutter in her stomach was just nerves. The common room had transformed into something almost festive. Someone had produced a fiddle, and a few people were dancing despite the cramped quarters. Others played cards or dice, drinking and laughing. The storm might have trapped them, but they were determined to make the best of it. Nathaniel found them seats near the fire, not too close to the revelers, but not isolated either. A good strategic position. Everything with him was strategy. They sat in silence for a while, watching the dancers. Then the innkeeper appeared with mugs of hot cider, pressing them into their hands with a knowing smile. "On the house," she said, "for the happy couple." "Thank you," Cass managed, feeling like a fraud. When the innkeeper left, Nathaniel leaned close and murmured, "You're going to have to smile at some point. Engaged women generally look happy." "Maybe this engaged woman is having second thoughts," Cass muttered back. His lips twitched. Convincing. Before she could respond, Victor materialized beside them like a bad penny. "Mind if I join you?" He didn't wait for an answer, just pulled up a chair. "Hell of a storm, isn't it? Could be stuck here for days." "We're prepared for that eventuality," Nathaniel said coolly. "I'm sure you are." Victor's gaze slid between them. "So tell me, how did you two meet? I'm always curious about love stories." Cass opened her mouth, but Nathaniel beat her to it. "At a land auction," he said smoothly. "She was there with her father. I was bidding on the adjacent property. She accused me of price gouging. It was true, actually. That was exactly how they'd met." Victor laughed. "Love at first fight, then?" "Something like that." Nathaniel's hand found Cass's again, lacing their fingers together. "She's always had a talent for keeping me honest." The words were perfectly pitched, affectionate, rueful, just the right amount of self-deprecating. Cass stared at him in shock. She'd never heard him talk like this before. "How sweet," Victor said, but there was an edge to his tone. "And when's the wedding?" "Spring," Cass heard herself say. "We're thinking spring." "Ah, a long engagement. Practical." Victor smiled. "Gives you time to be sure, doesn't it? Make certain you're making the right choice." There was definitely an implication there. Cass felt Nathaniel's hand tighten on hers. "I'm certain," she said, looking directly at Victor. "I've never been more certain of anything." The lie came out smooth as silk. She almost believed it herself. Victor's smile faltered, just for a second. Then he recovered. "Well then, congratulations again. I'll leave you two lovebirds alone." He stood and walked away, but Cass could feel his skepticism like a weight pressing down on them. "He doesn't believe us," she whispered. "No," Nathaniel agreed. "He doesn't. What do we do?" Nathaniel was quiet for a moment, his thumb moving absently across her knuckles. The touch was distracting, made it hard to think. "We sell it harder," he said finally. "Make it impossible for him to doubt." "How?" He turned to look at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "We act like a couple in love," he said quietly. "No half measures, no hesitation." Cass swallowed hard. "That's going to require some convincing performances." "Yes." His gaze dropped to her lips, then back up to her eyes. "It is." The air between them felt suddenly charged, dangerous. Cass was acutely aware of his hand still holding hers, of the way the firelight caught in his dark hair, of the sharp line of his jaw. This was Nathaniel Ashford, her enemy, the man who'd made her life hell for 3 years. So why was her heart racing? "I can do it," she said, more to convince herself than him. "I can play the part." "Good." He released her hand and she felt the loss of warmth immediately. "Because starting tomorrow, we're going to give them a love story they can't question." Cass nodded, not trusting her voice. Outside, the storm howled on, trapping them in this strange purgatory where lies became truth and enemies became something else entirely, something far more dangerous than the cold. The next morning came too soon and not soon enough. Cass had spent another restless night acutely aware of every sound Nathaniel made, the shift of his weight in the chair, the quiet exhale when he finally dozed off, the way he'd wake with a start every few hours, as if his body refused to fully surrender to sleep. When pale gray light finally crept through the frost-covered window, she found him already awake, staring into the remnants of last night's fire. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked. He turned, and in the dim light she could see the shadows under his eyes. "Some. You look terrible." "Thank you. You're radiant as always." The dry sarcasm caught her off guard, almost made her smile. Almost. "The storm's still going," she said, moving to the window. Outside, snow fell in thick, relentless sheets. The world had disappeared into white. "We're not getting out of here today either." "No." Nathaniel stood, stretching stiffly. She heard his spine crack. "Which means another day of performing." "Right. The performance." Selling their fake engagement to a room full of strangers, with Victor Calder watching their every move like a hawk circling wounded prey. "About that," Cass said slowly, "how exactly do you propose we make this more convincing?" Nathaniel was quiet for a moment, his expression unreadable. "We'll need to be closer. Physically." Her stomach did something complicated. "Define closer." "Touching. Sitting together. The kind of casual intimacy that actual couples have." He paused. "You'll need to stop flinching every time I come near you." "I don't flinch." "You do. Every single time." His gaze was steady, matter of fact. "I understand why. But if we're going to pull this off, you need to get comfortable with me touching you, and I need to get comfortable with you touching me." The way he said it, clinical, practical, somehow made it worse. Or better. Cass couldn't decide which. "Fine," she said. "So what do we do? Practice?" Something flickered in his eyes. "Unless you have a better idea." She didn't. Which was how Cass found herself standing in the middle of their small room, facing Nathaniel Ashford like they were about to engage in some bizarre dance lesson. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. "Probably, but necessary." He held out his hand. "Start simple. Take my hand." Cass looked at his outstretched palm like it might bite her. Then, feeling foolish, she placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and solid. Not gentle, but not rough either. Just there. "See?" he said quietly. "Not so terrible. It's weird. It's going to feel weird until it doesn't. That's the point." He shifted, bringing her hand up to rest against his chest. Engaged couples stand close. They touch casually. They're comfortable in each other's space. Cass could feel his heartbeat through the fabric of his shirt. Steady, controlled, unlike hers, which was doing something erratic and unhelpful. "How do you know so much about this?" she asked. "About what engaged couples do?" A shadow crossed his face. "I was engaged once. Before." That shocked her into silence. She'd never heard anything about Nathaniel being engaged. "What happened?" "She died. Fever took her 3 weeks before the wedding." The words came out flat, emotionless, which somehow made them worse. "I'm sorry," Cass said quietly. "I didn't know." "No one does. I don't talk about it." He released her hand, stepped back. "But I remember. I remember what it was like, how we were together." There was a weight to the confession that made Cass's chest tight. For just a moment, the careful mask he always wore had slipped, and she'd seen something raw underneath. Then it was gone, and he was all business again. "We should go down for breakfast," he said. "The longer we hide up here, the more suspicious it looks." He was right. Cass nodded and followed him downstairs, trying not to think about dead fiancés or the strange intimacy of standing so close to someone she was supposed to hate. The common room was already packed. The smell of frying bacon and fresh bread made Cass's stomach growl despite her nerves. They found seats at the same table as yesterday, near the fire. The innkeeper brought them plates loaded with food. "Storm's showing no signs of stopping," she said cheerfully. "Looks like you folks are stuck with us a while longer. Could be 3, 4 days before the roads are passable." 4 days. Cass's appetite vanished. "We'll make do," Nathaniel said smoothly. As soon as the innkeeper left, Victor appeared. Because of course he did. "Good morning, love birds." He pulled up a chair without invitation, settling in like he belonged there. "Sleep well?" "Very well," Nathaniel said. His hand found Cass's under the table, squeezing gently. A reminder. Play the part. "Cozy little room, isn't it?" Victor's smile was all teeth. "I'm right next door, actually. Walls are thin. I'm surprised I didn't hear more activity." The implication was clear and disgusting. Cass felt heat flood her face. Nathaniel's expression went cold. "Careful, Calder." "Oh, no offense meant." Victor held up his hands in mock surrender. "Just making conversation. You know how it is, trapped in close quarters, nothing to do but gossip and speculate." "Then perhaps you should find more productive ways to occupy your time," Nathaniel said icily. "Perhaps." Victor's gaze slid to Cass. "Though I have to admit I'm fascinated by your story. The Merritt girl and Nathaniel Ashford. Your families have been at each other's throats for years over those land disputes, haven't they?" Cass's blood went cold. "That's old history." "Is it? Funny how love can bloom in such hostile soil." Victor leaned forward. "Tell me, Cassandra. May I call you Cassandra? When exactly did you fall for our dear Nathaniel here? Was it before or after he tried to buy your father's land out from under him?" Nathaniel's hand tightened on hers, almost painfully. A warning. "People change," Cass said, forcing her voice to stay level. "We both did. We realized the feud was pointless. How enlightened." Victor sat back. "And your father? He's accepted this union?" "He will." The lie came easier this time. "Once he sees how happy we are." Victor didn't look convinced. "Well, I suppose stranger things have happened. Love conquers all, as they say." The mockery in his tone was barely concealed. Before Cass could respond, Nathaniel stood, pulling her up with him. "If you'll excuse us," he said, his voice like ice, "we'd like to enjoy our breakfast in peace." He guided Cass to a different table, farther from Victor's knowing smirk. As soon as they sat down, he leaned close. "He knows," Nathaniel murmured. "Or at least, he suspects. He's fishing for proof. So what do we do?" "We don't give him any." Nathaniel's jaw was tight. "No matter what he says, no matter how he provokes us, we stay consistent. We're engaged. We're in love. End of story. He's going to keep pushing." "Yes, which means we need to push back harder." Cass met his eyes. "How?" Nathaniel hesitated, then reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was gentle, almost tender, completely unlike him. "Like that," he said quietly. "Small touches, looks that linger, making it impossible for anyone to doubt that we're—" He trailed off. "Together," Cass finished. "Yes." His hand was still near her face, hovering. Without thinking, she leaned into it slightly, letting her cheek rest against his palm. His breath caught. She heard it, saw something flash in his eyes before he got it under control. "Good," he said, his voice rougher than before. "That's good. Keep doing that." They finished breakfast in charged silence. Cass was hyper-aware of every accidental brush of their arms, every moment their knees bumped under the table. It was exhausting, maintaining this constant vigilance, this performance. But it was also starting to feel dangerously natural. After breakfast, Nathaniel suggested they join some of the other guests in the common room. "Better to be visible," he said, "acting like we have nothing to hide." So they sat by the fire with a group of traders discussing the storm, the roads, the prospects for spring. Cass mostly listened, letting Nathaniel carry the conversation. He was good at this, the social maneuvering, the careful navigation of personalities and egos. She'd always known he was skilled in business. She'd just never seen him apply those skills in such an intimate setting. At some point, his arm ended up along the back of her chair, then somehow on her shoulders. She told herself it was just part of the act, but she couldn't ignore the warmth of him, the solid presence at her side. One of the traders, a grizzled man named Garrett, was telling a story about nearly losing his wagon in a river crossing. "Wife was screaming at me the whole time," he said with a laugh. "Said I was going to kill us both with my stubbornness." "But you made it across," his companion pointed out. "Barely, and I never heard the end of it." Garrett grinned. "That's marriage, though, isn't it? Someone to tell you when you're being an idiot." The group laughed. Nathaniel's fingers moved absently against Cass's shoulder, tracing small patterns through the fabric of her dress. It should have felt wrong. Instead, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "What about you two?" Garrett asked, nodding at them. "You fight much?" "Constantly," Nathaniel said, and there was actually warmth in his voice. "She's got opinions on everything." "As I should," Cass shot back. "Someone has to keep you honest." "See?" Nathaniel looked at the others. "This is what I'm in for." "You poor man," Garrett said, still grinning. "Must be torture." "Absolute hell." But Nathaniel was smiling too, and when Cass glanced up at him, she saw something in his expression that made her stomach flip. He was a good actor, too good. The morning bled into afternoon. The storm continued its assault on the world outside. Inside, the inn took on a strange, suspended quality, like they'd all been transported somewhere outside of normal time and space. Victor circled them periodically, always watching, always probing. But Nathaniel was ready for him every time, deflecting questions, redirecting conversations, all while maintaining the perfect image of a man contentedly in love. It was during a lull in the afternoon, when most of the other guests had retreated to their rooms for rest, that Victor made his real move. Cass had gone upstairs to fetch her shawl, leaving Nathaniel in the common room. She was coming back down the narrow staircase when she heard Victor's voice, low and pointed. "Quite the performance you're putting on." She froze on the stairs, out of sight, but able to hear clearly. "I don't know what you mean." Nathaniel's voice was cool, controlled. "Oh, I think you do. The loving touches, the fond looks. Very convincing, almost too convincing." Calder, "If you have something to say." "I'm saying," Victor interrupted, "that I've made my living reading people, knowing when they're lying, when they're hiding something. And you, my friend, are definitely hiding something." Silence. Cass pressed herself against the wall, hardly breathing. "Let me guess," Victor continued. "You got caught in this storm together, two people who can't stand each other, and realized you needed a cover story. So you invented an engagement. Very clever, very practical." "That's an interesting theory." Nathaniel's voice gave nothing away. "Do you have any proof?" "Not yet, but I will." Victor's tone shifted, became almost friendly. "Here's what I'm thinking. You give me, say, $500, and I keep my theories to myself. Everyone goes home happy. The lady's reputation stays intact." Blackmail. The bastard was blackmailing them. "And if I refuse," Nathaniel asked quietly, "then I start talking. Word spreads, questions get asked, and that pretty little fiancée of yours becomes unmarriageable. Her family's land becomes worthless because no one will do business with them. You understand how this works?" Cass's hands clenched into fists. She wanted to storm down there, wanted to slap that smug look off Victor's face, but Nathaniel was already speaking. "I'll give you nothing," he said, his voice hard as stone. "Because your theory is wrong. Cassandra and I are engaged. We're in love. And no amount of your speculation will change that." "Love," Victor laughed. "Right. The woman who spent 3 years fighting you tooth and nail over every acre, every water right, every boundary dispute, she suddenly loves you. Forgive me if I'm skeptical." "I don't need your forgiveness. I don't need anything from you except for you to stay away from my fiancé." "Or what? Or I'll make sure every business contact I have from here to the coast knows exactly what kind of man you are. A blackmailer, a liar, someone who preys on decent people trapped by circumstance." The threat hung in the air. Cass held her breath. "You're bluffing," Victor said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. "Try me." Another silence, longer this time. Then Victor spoke, and all the false friendliness was gone. "Fine. Keep your secrets. But this isn't over, Ashford. One way or another, the truth always comes out. And when it does, I'll be there to watch you both fall. Footsteps, Victor walking away. Cass waited a few more seconds, then continued down the stairs like she'd just arrived. Nathaniel was standing alone by the fire, his back rigid, hands clenched at his sides. Nathaniel? He turned, and for just a second, she saw fury in his eyes. Then it was gone, smoothed away behind that careful mask. Did you get your shawl? I heard, she said quietly. I was on the stairs. I heard everything. His jaw tightened. Then you know what we're dealing with. $500. He wanted $500 to keep quiet. Yes. Are you going to pay him? No. The word was absolute. Because that's not how blackmail works. You pay once, they come back for more. It never ends. So what do we do? Nathaniel looked at her, and she saw something shift in his expression, a decision being made. We double down, he said. We make it so convincing, so undeniable that no one, not Victor, not anyone, can question it. How? He stepped closer and Cass's breath caught. By stopping halfway. By committing fully to this fiction. I thought that's what we've been doing. No, we've been playing at it, going through the motions. His hand came up to cup her face, and this time there was nothing clinical about it. If we're going to survive this, we need to make everyone in this inn believe, beyond any shadow of doubt, that we're madly in love. Cass's heart was pounding. Including Victor? Especially Victor. And how exactly do we do that? Nathaniel's thumb brushed across her cheekbone. The touch sent shivers down her spine. We stop thinking like enemies pretending to be lovers. We start acting like lovers who used to be enemies. I don't understand the difference. The difference, he said softly, is that enemies pretending to be lovers are always watching themselves, always careful, always aware of the performance. But lovers who used to be enemies? They've crossed a line. They've chosen each other despite everything that should keep them apart. They're reckless with it, bold. He was so close now she could feel his breath on her face, could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. You want us to be reckless? She said. I want us to be believable. This is insane. Yes. His hand slid into her hair. But it's the only way. Someone coughed behind them. They sprang apart like guilty teenagers. One of the traitors, Garrett, was standing there, grinning. Don't mind me, he said. Just passing through. You two carry on. He winked and walked away, leaving them standing there, Cass's face burning, Nathaniel's expression unreadable. See? Nathaniel said quietly. That's what we need, that reaction. People seeing us and thinking, yes, they're definitely together, no question. Cass swallowed hard. Right, no question. Can you do it? She thought about Victor's threats, about what would happen if their lie was exposed, about her family's reputation, her future, everything she stood to lose. Yes, she said, I can do it. Good. But he didn't step away, didn't drop his hand from where it still rested against her neck. Because starting right now, every moment we're in public, we're a couple in love. No hesitation, no second guessing. And when we're alone, something flickered in his eyes. When we're alone, we can stop pretending. The words should have been reassuring. Instead, they felt like a lie. That night, they played their parts perfectly. Sat close during dinner, hands intertwined on the table. Laughed at each other's stories. Shared food from each other's plates. Every gesture carefully calibrated to project intimacy, comfort, belonging. Victor watched from across the room, his expression dark. But he didn't approach. Didn't say anything. After dinner, there was music again. Someone with a fiddle, someone else with a drum. People danced, drank, celebrated being alive despite the storm still raging outside. Dance with me, Nathaniel said. It wasn't a question. Before Cass could respond, he was pulling her to her feet, guiding her into the small space that had been cleared for dancing. She'd never danced with him before, had never been this close, this deliberately intertwined. His hand was warm on her waist, the other holding hers. They moved together to the simple reel, and Cass was suddenly, acutely aware of how well they fit. You're good at this, she said, breathless. I have hidden talents. Apparently. The music shifted, slowed. Other couples moved closer together. Nathaniel pulled her in, and suddenly they weren't dancing anymore. They were just swaying, holding each other, and Cass couldn't remember why this was supposed to be an act. "People are watching," Nathaniel murmured against her ear. "I know. Victor's watching. I know." His hand moved up her back, drawing her closer. "Then we should give them something to see." Cass tilted her head back to look at him. His face was inches from hers, his eyes dark and intense. The room around them seemed to fade. The music, the people, all of it distant and unimportant. "Like what?" Her voice came out barely a whisper. Nathaniel's gaze dropped to her lips, lingered there. "Like this." He kissed her. It was soft at first, barely more than a brush of lips. A question. Cass froze, her mind screaming that this was wrong. This was Nathaniel. This was the enemy. But her body didn't care about any of that. Her body was responding, leaning into him, her hands coming up to grip his shoulders as the kiss deepened. It wasn't supposed to feel like this. Wasn't supposed to make her head spin and her knees weak. It was supposed to be an act, a performance, nothing more. Except it didn't feel like nothing. When Nathaniel finally pulled back, Cass saw her own shock reflected in his eyes. They stared at each other, both breathing hard, while around them the music played on and people danced, and the world continued like nothing earth-shattering had just happened. "That was," Nathaniel started, then stopped, cleared his throat. "That should convince them." "Right." Cass's lips still tingled. "Convince them." "We should go upstairs," he said. "It's late." She nodded, not trusting her voice. They made their way through the crowd, accepting knowing smiles and good-natured teasing from the other guests. Victor was nowhere to be seen. Maybe he'd finally accepted defeat, or maybe he was just regrouping. The room felt smaller than ever. Cass went straight to the window, pressing her hands against the cold glass, trying to cool the heat in her cheeks. Behind her, she heard Nathaniel moving around, adding wood to the fire, preparing for another night on that damned uncomfortable chair. "Why did you do it?" The question came out before she could stop it. "Do what?" "Kiss me. In front of everyone like that." She turned to face him. "We didn't have to go that far." Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment, his expression shadowed in the firelight. "Yes," he said finally. "We did. Because Victor won't stop until he has proof we're lying. And the best way to prove we're not is to act like people who have nothing to hide. So it was all strategy, nothing more." "Of course." But he wouldn't meet her eyes. "What else would it be?" Cass laughed, and it came out bitter. "Right. What else?" She turned back to the window, watching the snow fall in the darkness. Her reflection stared back at her, flushed cheeks, bright eyes, lips still swollen from that kiss. She looked like a woman in love. The thought terrified her. "Get some sleep," Nathaniel said from behind her. "Tomorrow's going to be more of the same. More performing, more pretending, more blurring of lines until she couldn't tell what was real and what was fiction." Cass climbed into bed without another word. She heard Nathaniel settle into his chair, heard the fire crackle and pop. Outside, the storm continued its relentless assault. She lay there for what felt like hours, replaying that kiss in her mind. The way it had felt so right and so wrong all at once. The way Nathaniel had looked at her afterward, like he was seeing her for the first time. Eventually, exhaustion claimed her. She drifted into uneasy dreams of snowstorms and stolen kisses, and Victor's knowing smile watching from the shadows. When she woke in the dead of night, it was to the sound of Nathaniel's voice, low and strained. "No, no, please." She sat up. In the dying light of the fire, she could see him in the chair, his body rigid, his face twisted in something like pain. A nightmare. "Nathaniel!" She got out of bed, moved toward him. "Nathaniel, wake up." His eyes snapped open. For a second he looked at her without recognition, and there was such raw anguish in his expression that it stole her breath. Then he blinked, and it was gone. He was Nathaniel again, controlled, composed, impenetrable. "I'm fine," he said roughly. "Go back to bed." "You were having a nightmare." "I said, I'm fine." But he wasn't. His hands were shaking. Cass could see them trembling even in the dim light. Without thinking, she knelt beside his chair and took one of his hands in both of hers. "Talk to me." "There's nothing to talk about." "You're lying." He pulled his hand away. "You should go back to bed, Cassandra." "Not until you tell me what that was about." It's none of your concern. We're supposed to be engaged, she shot back. Engaged couples talk about things. They tell each other when something's wrong. This isn't real, he said harshly. None of this is real. Don't forget that. The words stung. Cass stood, anger flooding through her. Trust me, I haven't forgotten. You've made it very clear that this is all just a transaction to you, just business. That's not what I... He broke off, running a hand through his hair. I'm trying to protect you. From what? From me. The words burst out of him, raw and anguished. From getting tangled up in something that can only end badly. From caring about someone who's going to disappoint you. The confession hung between them, stark and honest. The nightmare, Cass said quietly. It was about her, wasn't it? Your fiancée who died. Nathaniel's jaw clenched. I dream about finding her. The fever had taken hold so fast. By the time I got there, he stopped, swallowed hard. I was too late. I'm always too late. Cass's heart cracked. She'd spent 3 years seeing Nathaniel as nothing but an obstacle, an opponent. She'd never considered that he might be carrying his own grief, his own pain. I'm sorry, she said softly. Don't. His voice was brittle. Don't be kind to me. It makes this harder. Makes what harder? He looked at her then, really looked at her, and the expression in his eyes made her chest tight. Remembering that this is temporary, that in a few days the storm will clear and we'll go back to being enemies, that none of this, he gestured between them, means anything. Cass opened her mouth, then closed it. What could she say? That it did mean something? That somewhere between the lies and the performance something had shifted? That would be insane. You're right, she said instead. We should maintain boundaries. This is just survival. Nothing more. Nothing more, he echoed. She went back to bed, lay there in the darkness, listening to him breathe, and knew with absolute certainty that they were both lying. The lie lasted exactly 12 more hours. Morning brought no relief from the storm, but it did bring clarity of a brutal kind. Cass woke to find Nathaniel already dressed, standing by the window with his arms crossed, staring out at the endless white. The innkeeper says the road's completely blocked, he said without turning. Could be a week before they can clear it. A week. 7 more days of this. Cass sat up, her whole body aching from tension she couldn't release even in sleep. We can't keep this up for a week. We don't have a choice. His voice was flat, distant. Whatever vulnerability he'd shown last night was locked away again. Unless you'd prefer the alternative. The alternative. Ruin, scandal, her family's name destroyed. No, she didn't prefer that. But she also couldn't keep pretending that these performances didn't cost her something. Every touch, every look, every moment of manufactured intimacy was chipping away at her defenses, making her forget why she'd hated him in the first place. They went downstairs in silence. The common room was quieter this morning. People were starting to show the strain of confinement. Tempers were shorter, conversations more clipped. The festive atmosphere of the previous nights had curdled into something tense and waiting. Victor was at his usual table, watching them with that calculating expression. He nodded as they passed, his smile sharp. Sleep well? Perfectly, Nathaniel said, his hand finding the small of Cass's back. The touch felt different today. Less like a performance, more like a claim. They found seats near the kitchen, away from Victor's direct line of sight. The innkeeper brought them coffee and bread, her expression sympathetic. Rough crowd this morning, she said quietly. Had to break up 2 fights already. People are getting cabin fever. Understandable, Nathaniel said. Just keep to yourselves today. Some of these men are looking for trouble. She glanced at Cass, especially when it comes to pretty young women. After she left, Cass leaned close to Nathaniel. This place is a powder keg. Yes, his jaw was tight, which means we need to be even more careful. They ate in tense silence, hyper-aware of the hostile energy building in the room. 2 trappers were arguing loudly about a card game. A merchant was complaining about lost profits. Everyone was on edge. Then Victor stood up. He didn't come to their table. Instead, he positioned himself in the center of the common room and raised his voice just enough to cut through the ambient noise. Can I have everyone's attention for a moment? Conversations died. People turned to look. Cass's stomach dropped. She felt Nathaniel go rigid beside her. I think we all deserve a little entertainment to pass the time, Victor continued, his tone light and friendly. So I propose a game, truth or dare. Simple, harmless fun. A few people laughed nervously. Others looked interested. Anything to break the monotony. I'll go first, Victor said, his eyes finding Cass across the room. And I choose truth. This is a trap, Nathaniel murmured. I know. One of the trappers, already half drunk, stood up. All right, Calder, here's a truth question for you. What's the real reason you're so interested in those two? He jerked his chin toward Cass and Nathaniel. Victor's smile widened. Excellent question. The truth is, I find their story fascinating. Two people from feuding families suddenly engaged? It's like something out of a storybook, almost too good to be true. The emphasis on too good was deliberate, a challenge. Nathaniel started to rise, but Cass grabbed his arm. Don't. That's what he wants. He's calling us liars in front of everyone. And if you react, you prove him right. Nathaniel's muscles were coiled tight under her hand, but he stayed seated. Victor was still talking, spinning his web. So here's what I'm curious about, he said, addressing the room. How many of you believe in love at first sight, or second sight, or third sight, after 3 years of bitter rivalry? A few uncomfortable laughs. People were starting to understand where this was going. Because I've seen a lot of things in my time, Victor continued. But I've never seen two enemies become lovers without some very compelling reason, usually involving money or land, or, he paused meaningfully, circumstances that require a convenient cover story. The room had gone completely silent now. Every eye was on them. Cass felt heat crawl up her neck, but she forced herself to stay calm, to not react. Nathaniel's hand found hers under the table, gripping tight enough to hurt. Are you accusing them of something, Calder? The innkeeper asked sharply. Not accusing, just wondering aloud. Victor's gaze locked on Nathaniel. Care to prove me wrong, Ashford? Tell us all how you fell in love with the daughter of your sworn enemy. It was a direct challenge. Answer and feed Victor's suspicions with nervous explanations, or refuse and look guilty. Nathaniel stood slowly. Cass's heart hammered. You want to know how I fell in love with her? His voice was steady, cold. Fine, I'll tell you. Nathaniel, don't... Cass started, but he was already talking. 3 years ago, she stood in a land auction and called me a vulture in front of 50 people, said I was a parasite feeding on other people's hard work. She was fearless and furious and completely unreasonable. He paused, and I couldn't stop thinking about her. Cass stared at him. This wasn't part of the script. This wasn't planned. Every time we fought after that, every argument, every clash, she never backed down, never gave an inch. She matched me word for word, move for move. And somewhere along the way, I realized I didn't want to beat her anymore. I wanted to deserve her. The room was transfixed. Even Victor looked caught off guard. So yes, Nathaniel continued, his voice dropping but somehow carrying through the silence. We were enemies. We fought like hell. And maybe that's exactly why this works. Because we already know the worst of each other. We've already tested each other in every way that matters. And we chose this anyway. He turned to Cass, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. I chose her anyway. For a long suspended moment, no one moved. No one spoke. Then Garrett the traitor started clapping. Others joined in, and suddenly the whole room was applauding, some whistling, the tension breaking like a fever. Victor's expression went dark. He'd been outmaneuvered, and he knew it. Nathaniel held out his hand to Cass. She took it, let him pull her to her feet. They walked through the crowd toward the stairs. People calling out congratulations, well wishes. But Cass barely heard them. Her ears were ringing, her heart pounding. She couldn't tell if that speech had been brilliant strategy or something else entirely. They made it to their room and Nathaniel closed the door, leaning back against it. For a moment they just stood there, breathing hard like they'd been running. That was insane, Cass said finally. It was necessary. Was it? Or did you just... She stopped, unsure how to finish. Or did you just tell the truth? Nathaniel pushed away from the door, started pacing. He was going to keep pushing until something broke. I had to shut him down. By making a public declaration of love. By giving everyone in that room a reason to believe us. To defend us against his insinuations. It worked, Cass admitted. They're on our side now. Yes. But he didn't sound triumphant. He sounded exhausted. Cass watched him pace, watched the tension in his shoulders, the way he wouldn't meet her eyes. Something had shifted down there. Some line had been crossed. How much of that was true? She asked quietly. He stopped pacing. Does it matter? Yes, it matters to me. Nathaniel turned to face her, and the expression on his face was raw, unguarded. You want the truth? I don't know anymore. I don't know what's real and what's performance. It's all bleeding together. The confession hung between them, dangerous and electric. Since when? Cass heard herself ask. Since... He broke off, ran a hand through his hair. I don't know. Since that first night, maybe. Since I realized that protecting you mattered more than winning our stupid feud. Since I kissed you, and it felt like coming home to something I didn't know I'd lost. Cass's heart was hammering so hard she could barely breathe. Nathaniel! A sharp knock at the door cut her off. They both froze. Mr. Ashford? The innkeeper's voice, urgent. I need to speak with you. It's important. Nathaniel opened the door. The innkeeper's face was pale, worried. It's Victor Calder, she said. He's been asking questions downstairs about Miss Merritt's family, about the land disputes. He's told several people he's sending a message to the nearest town as soon as the weather breaks. Says he has business contacts who will be very interested in your situation. Cass's blood went cold. He's going to investigate our story. More than that, the innkeeper said grimly. He's going to make sure everyone knows about it. Turn it into public scandal before you have a chance to control the narrative. Nathaniel's expression went hard. How long until the weather breaks? Could be tomorrow, could be tonight if this wind shifts. Then we don't have much time. After the innkeeper left, Nathaniel turned to Cass. He's escalating. Once he gets word out, once people start talking. We're finished, Cass said flatly. My reputation, my family's standing, everything. Unless we stop him. How? He hasn't actually done anything illegal. We can't have him arrested for gossip. Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment, thinking. When he spoke, his voice was careful. We could leave, tonight, risk the storm. That's suicide. We'd freeze to death in an hour. Maybe. Or maybe we'd make it to the next town before Victor can send his messages. Get our story out first. Cass stared at him. You're serious. I'm desperate. There's a difference. He moved to the window, looking out at the swirling snow. But you're right. It's too dangerous. So what do we do? Just wait for him to destroy us? No. Nathaniel turned back to her, and there was something fierce in his expression. We beat him to it. We take control of the narrative before he can. How? We make it real. The words landed like a physical blow. Cass felt the air leave her lungs. What are you saying? I'm saying we stop pretending. We get actually engaged, right now, tonight, in front of everyone. That's insane. Is it? Think about it. Once we're officially engaged, Victor has nothing. His threats become meaningless. He can investigate all he wants. The answer he'll find is that we're exactly what we claim to be. But we're not, Cass said desperately. This is all fake. You said it yourself. None of this is real. Nathaniel crossed the room in 3 strides and took her face in his hands. Then we make it real. We choose it. We commit to it fully, and we dare anyone, Victor, our families, the whole damn world, to challenge us. His hands were warm against her skin. His eyes were burning with an intensity that made her dizzy. You're asking me to marry you, she said, for real. I'm asking you to trust me, to take this leap with me and see where we land. This is crazy. Yes. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. But so is everything else we've done. At least this way, we control the outcome. Cass's mind was spinning. Marriage to Nathaniel Ashford. A week ago, the idea would have been laughable. Now she couldn't think of a single good reason to say no, except that she was terrified, except that somewhere in the past 3 days she'd started feeling things she had no business feeling, except that making this real meant no more safety net, no more exit strategy. What about our families? She asked. Your family wanted you to marry some earl's daughter. Mine wanted me to marry for love, not strategy. This is love, Nathaniel said quietly. Or it could be, if we let it. The words hung between them, a promise and a threat all at once. Before Cass could respond, shouting erupted from downstairs. Loud, angry voices. Something crashed. They ran to the door and looked down the stairwell. The common room had devolved into chaos. The two trappers from earlier were fighting, throwing punches while others tried to pull them apart. Tables overturned, glass breaking. And in the middle of it all, Victor, watching with a satisfied smile. He started this, Cass breathed. He pushed them until they snapped, creating a distraction. Nathaniel's jaw clenched. While everyone's focused on the fight, he'll slip away, send his messages. We have to stop him. But Victor was already moving, edging toward the door while everyone else was occupied with the brawl. He caught Nathaniel's eye across the chaos and smirked. Then he was gone, disappearing into the storm. Nathaniel started after him, but Cass grabbed his arm. You'll freeze out there. I can't let him. Look at me. She forced him to meet her eyes. You go out there, you die. And then where does that leave me? Where does that leave us? The word us hung between them, weighted with all the things they hadn't said. Nathaniel's expression crumbled. He wins. If I don't stop him, he wins. No. Cass's mind was racing, pieces falling into place. No, he doesn't, because we're going to do exactly what you said. We're going to make it real. Tonight. In front of everyone. Cassandra, you were right. Once we're officially engaged, his threats mean nothing. And if he's out there freezing in a blizzard trying to send messages that don't matter anymore, that's his problem. Nathaniel searched her face. Are you sure? Was she? No. She wasn't sure of anything except that standing here in this moment, the idea of letting Nathaniel walk away into that storm made her chest hurt in a way she couldn't explain. I'm sure, she lied. Or maybe it wasn't a lie. Maybe somewhere in the past 3 days, buried under all the performance and pretense, something genuine had taken root. Downstairs, the innkeeper and several others had finally separated the fighters. The common room was a disaster. Broken furniture, spilled drinks, angry men nursing bruises. Nathaniel took a breath, squared his shoulders. Then he walked down the stairs, pulling Cass with him. Everyone, his voice cut through the noise. I need your attention. The room gradually quieted. People turned to look, bloodied and breathing hard. I know tensions are high, Nathaniel continued. We're all stuck here, all on edge. But I'd like to propose something that might lift our spirits. A celebration. Confused murmurs. The innkeeper frowned. Tonight, Nathaniel said, his hand finding Cass's, I'm going to marry this woman, right here, in this inn, and I'd like all of you to witness it. The room erupted. Shocked exclamations, questions, a few whoops of approval. Cass stood frozen, her hand in Nathaniel's, and felt the full weight of what they'd just committed to crash down on her. Garrett the traitor pushed through the crowd. You're serious? You want to get married tonight? I'm completely serious. Nathaniel's grip on Cass's hand tightened. We were going to wait until we reached her family, but after what happened earlier, after Mr. Calder's insinuations, I realize I don't want to wait another day. I want everyone here to know, without question, that I'm committed to this woman. Fully and forever. The innkeeper stepped forward, her expression calculating. I can perform marriages, got the authority from the territorial government, but you'll need witnesses, and I'll witness, Garrett said immediately. Me too, another traitor chimed in. Others nodded, the energy in the room shifting from hostile to excited. People loved weddings, even impromptu ones in snowbound inns. Then it's settled, Nathaniel said. We'll marry tonight before supper, and I invite all of you to celebrate with us. More cheering. People were already talking about decorations, about music, about turning this disaster of a day into something festive. The innkeeper pulled Cass aside while Nathaniel was surrounded by well-wishers. You're sure about this, dear? Her eyes were kind but searching. Marriage is permanent, especially out here. Cass thought about Victor out in the storm, about the threats hanging over them, about the way Nathaniel had looked at her upstairs when he said, "This is love, or it could be." I'm sure, she said. The lie was getting easier. The next few hours passed in a blur. The innkeeper's daughter found Cass a dress. Not a wedding dress, just a simple blue gown that fit reasonably well. Someone else produced ribbons for her hair. The common room was hastily cleaned and decorated with whatever materials people could scavenge. Through it all, Cass moved like she was dreaming. This couldn't be real. She couldn't actually be preparing to marry Nathaniel Ashford in a frontier inn during a blizzard. But she was. She stood in front of the small, cracked mirror in her room, hardly recognizing herself. The woman staring back looked terrified and determined in equal measure. A soft knock. The innkeeper's daughter peeked in. "They're ready for you, miss." Cass took a shaky breath. "Already?" Mr. Ashford was quite insistent about not waiting. Of course he was. The longer they waited, the more chance Victor would return, or the weather would clear, or something would happen to derail this insane plan. Cass followed the girl downstairs. The common room had been transformed, candles everywhere making it glow warm and golden. People lined up along the walls, creating an impromptu aisle. Someone was playing the fiddle softly, and at the end of the makeshift aisle stood Nathaniel. He'd cleaned up, changed into a fresh shirt. His hair was combed back, his expression serious. When he saw her, something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, or maybe fear, or maybe something else entirely. Cass walked toward him, each step feeling both inevitable and impossible. This was Nathaniel, her enemy, the man who'd made her life hell for 3 years, the man who'd protected her without question, who'd risked his reputation to shield hers, who'd looked at her in that room upstairs and said, "This is love, or it could be," like he was offering her the world. She reached him. His hand found hers, steady and warm. The innkeeper stepped between them and the crowd, a worn book in her hands. "Dearly beloved," she began, and Cass had to suppress a slightly hysterical laugh at the formality of it all. The words washed over her. Traditional vows, promises of loyalty and love and forever. When it came time for her to speak, her voice came out steadier than she expected. "I do." Nathaniel's turn. He looked at her, really looked at her, and said clearly, "I do. Then by the authority vested in me by the territorial government, I pronounce you husband and wife." The innkeeper smiled. "You may kiss your bride." Nathaniel's hands came up to frame her face, gentle and careful. "Are you ready for this?" She didn't know if he meant the kiss, or the marriage, or the rest of their lives. "No," she whispered, "but do it anyway." He kissed her. It was different from the kiss in front of everyone the previous night. That had been performance, strategy. This was a promise, a seal on something neither of them fully understood, but both had chosen anyway. The room erupted in applause, people cheering, whistling, stomping their feet. When Nathaniel pulled back, Cass saw her own shock reflected in his eyes. They'd actually done it. They were married. The celebration that followed was raucous and joyful. People brought out hidden bottles of whiskey. The fiddle played faster, livelier. Someone pushed the tables aside for dancing. Cass and Nathaniel moved through it all in a daze, accepting congratulations, smiling, playing the parts of happy newlyweds while their minds reeled with the enormity of what they'd done. It was nearly midnight when Victor returned. He stumbled through the door, half frozen, covered in snow. His lips were blue, his hands shaking violently. The innkeeper rushed to help him, wrapping him in blankets, shoving hot cider into his hands. When he could finally speak, his eyes found Nathaniel and Cass across the room. "What?" His voice was hoarse. "What happened here?" Garrett clapped him on the shoulder. "You missed it, Calder. These two got married, proper ceremony and everything. You're looking at Mr. and Mrs. Nathaniel Ashford now." The color drained from Victor's face, what little color had returned from the cold. "Married." The word came out strangled. "That's right," Nathaniel said, moving to stand beside Cass. His arm slid around her waist, possessive and final. "My wife and I decided not to wait. Given the circumstances, it seemed appropriate to make our commitment official." Victor stared at them, and Cass could see his mind working, trying to find an angle, a way to turn this to his advantage. But there was nothing. They'd outmaneuvered him completely. "Congratulations," he finally managed, the word bitter as poison. "Thank you," Cass said sweetly. "We're very happy." The look Victor gave them promised that this wasn't over, that somehow, someday, he'd find a way to make them pay. But for tonight, they'd won. The celebration wound down eventually. People drifted to their rooms, drunk and happy. The innkeeper showed Nathaniel and Cass to a different room, slightly larger, with a real bed instead of a cot. "For the newlyweds," she said with a knowing wink. Then they were alone. The room felt enormous and tiny all at once. Cass stood in the middle of it, suddenly hyper-aware that she was married. To Nathaniel. That this wasn't pretend anymore. "I'll sleep in the chair," Nathaniel said quietly. like before. We're married now. People will expect. I know what they'll expect. His voice was rough. But this wasn't. I didn't do this to trap you into anything. The marriage is real, but everything else can stay whatever you want it to be. Cass turned to look at him. He was standing by the window, his back to her, shoulders rigid. What do you want it to be? She asked. Long silence. Outside, the storm was finally starting to ease. I want. Nathaniel started, then stopped, turned to face her. I want whatever you're willing to give. If that's just a legal arrangement to protect both our reputations, fine. If it's something more, then. He trailed off. Then what? He crossed the room in 2 strides and kissed her, hard, desperate, nothing like the careful performance kisses before. This was real. This was him, finally letting the mask drop completely. When he pulled back, they were both breathing hard. Then I want everything, he said roughly. I want you, Cassandra, not the performance, not the pretense, you. The woman who's infuriated me and challenged me and made me feel alive for the first time in years. Cass's heart was hammering. This is insane. I know. We hated each other a week ago. I know. Our families are going to be furious. I know. His hands tightened on her waist. But I also know that I've never been more certain of anything than I am of this. Of us. Cass searched his face, looking for the lie, the strategy. But there was nothing there except raw, terrifying honesty. She thought about the past 3 days. About how somewhere between the forced proximity and the desperate pretense, something real had emerged. About how she'd started looking forward to his rare smiles, to the way his carefully controlled demeanor would crack around her. About how the thought of going back to being enemies felt impossible now. I'm scared, she admitted. So am I. What if this is a mistake? Then we'll figure it out together. He rested his forehead against hers. But Cassandra, I'd rather make this mistake with you than play it safe with anyone else. Outside, the wind was dying down. The storm that had trapped them here, that had forced this impossible situation, was finally ending. But inside, in this small room, a different kind of storm was just beginning. Cass reached up and kissed him. Not because anyone was watching, not because it was strategic, just because she wanted to. And when Nathaniel's arms came around her, pulling her close, she felt something click into place. Something that felt terrifyingly like belonging. They'd started this as a lie. A desperate fiction to survive an impossible situation. But somewhere along the way, between the performances and the confessions, between the fear and the tentative trust, it had become the truest thing in her life. The storm outside finally broke. Through the window, Cass could see the first stars emerging from the clearing clouds. Tomorrow would bring consequences. Victor's lingering threats, the journey home, facing their families with the truth of what they'd done. But tonight, in this room, with Nathaniel's arms around her and the lie finally becoming real, Cass let herself believe that maybe they'd found something worth fighting for. Something worth all the chaos and risk and impossible choices. Each other. Dawn came cold and clear. Cass woke to find herself wrapped in Nathaniel's arms, her head resting on his chest, his breathing deep and even. For a moment, she didn't move. Just lay there, listening to his heartbeat and trying to process the fact that this was real now. Legal, permanent. She was married to Nathaniel Ashford. His eyes open, met hers. For a second, she saw the same disbelief she felt reflected back at her. Then his mouth curved into something that might have been a smile. Morning, wife. The word sent a jolt through her. Morning, husband. They lay there in the pale light, neither quite ready to face what came next. Outside, she could hear movement, the inn coming to life, people stirring, the world starting to turn again now that the storm had passed. We should talk, Nathaniel said finally. About what happens now. You mean about going home and telling our families we got married in a frontier inn during a blizzard? That's one way to put it. He sat up, running a hand through his disheveled hair. My father is going to lose his mind. He had 3 different marriage prospects lined up for me, all strategic, all beneficial to the family business. My parents wanted me to marry for love, Cass said quietly. They're going to ask if this is what I want. Nathaniel turned to look at her. Is it? The question hung between them, enormous and terrifying. Last night, in the heat of the moment, choosing this had felt inevitable. In the cold light of morning, Cass wasn't sure of anything except that the thought of walking away now felt impossible. "I don't know what this is," she admitted, "but I know I don't regret it." "Neither do I." He reached for her hand. "So we face it together, whatever comes." A knock at the door interrupted them. The innkeeper's voice, cheerful and intrusive. "Breakfast in 20 minutes. Roads should be clear enough to travel by noon." Reality crashed back in. Noon. They'd be leaving, going back to their separate lives, except those lives weren't separate anymore. They were tangled together now, bound by vows and witnesses and a marriage certificate the innkeeper would file with the territorial government. They dressed quickly, awkwardly navigating the intimacy of sharing space as actual newlyweds. When they went downstairs, the common room erupted in good-natured teasing and congratulations. People who'd been hostile strangers 3 days ago were now treating them like beloved friends. All except Victor. He sat alone at a corner table, nursing coffee and watching them with those cold, calculating eyes. When Nathaniel and Cass sat down for breakfast, he finally approached. "Quite the performance last night," he said quietly, so only they could hear. "Very convincing." "It wasn't a performance," Nathaniel said flatly. "It was a wedding." "Right. A wedding that conveniently happened the same night I went to send my messages." Victor's smile was thin. Funny timing. "Think what you want," Cass said, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. "We're legally married. Whatever theories you had are irrelevant now." "Are they?" Victor leaned in. "Because I'm still going to make inquiries. I'm still going to ask questions. And when people back in your hometown hear that you two got married in secret after years of feuding, they're going to wonder why." "Let them wonder," Nathaniel said. His hand found Cass's under the table. "We have nothing to hide." Victor's eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that." He walked away, but the threat lingered like smoke. "He's not going to let this go," Cass murmured. "No, he's not." Nathaniel's jaw was tight, which means we need to control the narrative before he does. We need to get home and tell our families ourselves before rumors start spreading. The innkeeper brought them plates of eggs and bacon, still beaming. "You two heading out today?" "As soon as the roads are safe," Nathaniel confirmed. "Well, you've got my blessing. Never seen two people more suited to each other, even if you did take the scenic route to figuring it out." She winked and moved on to the next table. Garrett stopped by on his way out. "Safe travels, you two. And congratulations again. Takes courage to choose your own path." After he left, Cass turned to Nathaniel. "Did we choose our own path, or did we just back ourselves into a corner we couldn't escape from? Does it matter?" "I don't know. Maybe." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "My father always told me that the best business decisions are the ones you make under pressure. When you don't have time to overthink, to let fear paralyze you, you just choose and commit." "This isn't business." "No, it's more important than that." His eyes met hers. "Which is why I'm choosing to believe we made the right call, even if it was insane, even if everyone thinks we've lost our minds." By noon, the roads were declared passable. The driver had repaired the carriage as best he could. Other travelers were preparing to leave, eager to escape their confinement. Cass packed her few belongings, trying not to think about the fact that she was going home as a completely different person than she'd been 4 days ago. Married. To Nathaniel Ashford. It still didn't feel real. They said their goodbyes to the innkeeper and the other guests. Even some of the rough-looking men who'd made Cass nervous that first night were friendly now, shaking Nathaniel's hand and wishing them well. Victor was nowhere to be seen. He'd left at dawn, the innkeeper said, heading in a different direction. "Good riddance," Cass muttered, but as their carriage pulled away from the inn, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, that Victor's parting words, "We'll see about that," were a promise, not a threat. The journey home took 2 days. 2 days of cramped quarters in the repaired carriage, of stops at small towns and way stations, of navigating the strange new reality of being married. They talked more in those 2 days than they had in 3 years of knowing each other. About their childhoods, their families, the paths that had led them to that land auction where they'd first clashed. Cass learned that Nathaniel's rigid control came from losing his mother young and having to manage his father's expectations. Nathaniel learned that Cass's fierce independence was born from watching her father get pushed around by bigger landowners and vowing never to be powerless. They also learned how to exist together, how to share space without fighting, how to read each other's moods and silences. It wasn't comfortable yet, but it was starting to feel possible. On the second night, staying at a small inn that was nothing like the place where they'd married, Nathaniel brought up the inevitable. We need a plan for when we arrive, for what we tell people. Cass had been dreading this conversation. The truth? Which version? That we started as a lie to protect your reputation and ended up making it real? That'll go over well. So we lie again? Not lie, just edit. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, exhausted from travel. We tell them we were secretly courting for months, that we kept it quiet because of the family tensions, that the storm forced our hand and we decided to marry rather than wait. That's not that far from the truth, Cass admitted. No, it's just missing the middle part where we couldn't stand each other. She almost laughed. Right, that minor detail. Cassandra. He looked at her seriously. My father is going to fight this. He's going to try to get it annulled, or claim I was coerced, or can he do that? He can try. He has connections, influence. But it won't work, because I'll make it clear that this was my choice, fully and completely. Even though it started as a desperate measure, especially because of that. His voice was firm. The best things in my life have come from desperate measures. From taking risks when the safe path was closing. Cass sat down beside him, their shoulders touching. Your father isn't the only problem. My family is going to ask questions too. They're going to wonder why I'd marry someone I've spent years opposing. So what do we tell them? She thought about it. About the past 4 days, about everything that had shifted and changed between them, about the way her heart had started doing complicated things whenever he looked at her. We tell them that people change, that we changed, and that sometimes the person who challenges you the most is exactly the person you need. Nathaniel turned to look at her, and there was something soft in his expression. That's good. That's believable. It's also true. His hand found hers. Yes, it is. They arrived in town the next afternoon. The familiar buildings and streets should have been comforting, but Cass felt nothing but dread. In a few hours, everyone would know. The news would spread like wildfire. Cass and Nathaniel Ashford, married. We should tell our families first, Nathaniel said as the carriage rolled through the main street, before they hear it from someone else. Together or separately? Together, united front. The carriage stopped first at Cass's family home, a modest but well-kept property on the edge of town. Her parents were in the yard, her father mending a fence while her mother tended the garden. They looked up as the carriage approached, their expressions shifting from curiosity to concern when they saw who was inside. Cassandra? Her mother wiped her hands on her apron, frowning. What are you doing with him? Her father's expression went hard. Ashford, you've got some nerve showing up here. Nathaniel climbed out of the carriage and offered his hand to help Cass down. The gesture didn't go unnoticed. Her mother's eyes widened. Mama, Papa. Cass's voice came out steadier than she felt. We need to talk to you. They went inside, the tension thick enough to cut. Her parents sat on one side of the small dining table, Cass and Nathaniel on the other. Her father's hands were clenched into fists. What's this about? He demanded. Cass took a breath. Nathaniel and I are married. The silence was deafening. Her mother's face went pale. Her father stood up so fast his chair fell backward. You're what? We got married 3 days ago, during the storm, at a frontier inn. This is insane. Her father turned to Nathaniel, his face flushed with anger. What did you do to her? What kind of pressure did you put on my daughter to— He didn't pressure me, Cass interrupted. It was my choice. We both chose this. You've hated him for 3 years. He's tried to steal our land, to push us out. That was business, Nathaniel said quietly. This is different. Different? Her father laughed harshly. How convenient. You couldn't beat us in court, so you married my daughter instead. Is that your strategy? Thomas, please. Her mother's voice was shaking. Let them explain. So they did. The edited version, months of secret courtship, keeping it quiet to avoid inflaming tensions, the storm forcing them to act sooner than planned. It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't exactly a lie either. Her parents listened in strained silence. When they finished, her mother spoke first. Do you love him, Cassandra? The question caught her off guard. Did she? She'd been so focused on survival, on strategy, on making the marriage look convincing that she hadn't stopped to actually examine her feelings. But when she looked at Nathaniel, at the man who'd protected her without question, who'd risked his reputation to shield hers, who'd made an impossible choice and stood by it, she knew the answer. Yes, she said, I do. Her father made a disgusted sound. This is a disaster. When people find out, let them find out, Cass said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. I'm married to him now. That's done. We can either fight about it or accept it, but nothing's going to change the facts. Her mother was studying Nathaniel with sharp eyes. And you? Do you love my daughter? Nathaniel didn't hesitate. With everything I have. Even though she's fought you at every turn, even though marrying her gains you nothing but more trouble, especially because of that. His hand found Cass's under the table. She makes me better, makes me question my assumptions. I've never met anyone like her. Her mother's expression softened slightly. Her father still looked furious, but there was something else there too. Resignation, maybe. Or the beginning of acceptance. This is going to cause problems, he said finally, for both our families. I know, Nathaniel said, but we're prepared to face them. Are you? Her father's gaze was hard. Because my daughter's reputation is at stake here. If this is some scheme, some temporary arrangement that you plan to abandon when it becomes inconvenient, it's not. Nathaniel's voice was steel. I made vows. In front of witnesses. Those vows are binding, and I intend to honor them for the rest of my life. The conviction in his words seemed to reach her father. He sat back down heavily, looking suddenly old. I need time to process this, he said. You should go. Tell your own father. See how he takes it. They left, Cass's heart heavy. Her mother had hugged her at the door, whispering, Be careful. Love isn't always enough. But what choice did they have except to try? Nathaniel's family estate was on the other side of town, a grand house that had always intimidated Cass with its size and obvious wealth. As the carriage pulled up to the entrance, she felt Nathaniel tense beside her. My father can be difficult, he said. Don't take anything he says personally. Noted. They were shown into a drawing room where Nathaniel's father, Richard Ashford, was reading correspondence. He looked up as they entered, his expression shifting from surprise to displeasure when he saw Cass. Nathaniel, what is she doing here? Father, we need to talk. What followed was worse than the conversation with Cass's parents. Richard Ashford didn't shout. He didn't rage. He went cold and calculated, dissecting their story with surgical precision, finding every weak point, every inconsistency. You married her in secret, he said flatly, without consulting me, without considering the consequences. I considered them, Nathaniel said. I chose her anyway. You chose poorly. Richard's gaze cut to Cass. No offense intended, Miss Merritt. Or should I say, Mrs. Ashford. But you must understand this marriage is a disaster for our family interests. I understand you had other plans, Cass said carefully, but those plans didn't account for what Nathaniel wanted. What he wanted? Richard laughed without humor. Nathaniel, you're 28 years old. You've been groomed your entire life to take over this business, to make strategic decisions. And your first major decision is to marry the daughter of a man we've been in legal disputes with for 3 years? Those disputes end now, Nathaniel said firmly. Cass's family and ours are connected now. We have a vested interest in cooperation, not conflict. Or you've given them leverage over us, access to our business dealings, our strategies. She's my wife, Nathaniel said, his voice dangerously quiet. Not a spy. Richard stood. This marriage needs to be annulled, immediately, before word gets out and damages our reputation beyond repair. No. Nathaniel, I said no. Nathaniel stood too, meeting his father's glare with one of his own. The marriage is legal. It's final, and I'm not undoing it, no matter what threats you make. Then you leave me no choice. Richard's voice went cold. You're removed from the business. Effective immediately. No position, no authority, no inheritance. The words landed like blows. Cass saw Nathaniel flinch, saw the pain flash across his face before he got it under control. So be it, he said quietly. Nathaniel, think about what you're throwing away. I have thought about it, every moment since I made this decision. Nathaniel's hand found Cass's, gripped tight. And I choose her. Over the business, over the inheritance, over everything you're threatening to take away. I choose her. Richard stared at his son like he was looking at a stranger. Then you're a fool. Maybe, but I'm a fool who's going to build something better than what you're offering. They left before Richard could respond. Outside, Nathaniel was shaking. From anger or fear or the enormity of what he'd just sacrificed, Cass couldn't tell. I'm sorry, she said as the carriage pulled away. I didn't mean for you to lose everything. You didn't make me lose it. I chose. He turned to look at her, and despite the pain in his eyes, there was also certainty. I'd make the same choice again. But your inheritance, the business, can be rebuilt, on our own terms, without my father's conditions. He squeezed her hand. I meant what I said in there. I choose you, Cassandra, whatever that costs. The words settled over her like a vow more binding than the ones they'd spoken at the inn. By the next morning, the entire town knew. Cass could feel the weight of stares and whispers as she walked through the market. Nathaniel had gone to meet with his lawyer to make sure the marriage couldn't be challenged or undone. She'd needed air, space to think. She was examining apples at a vendor's stall when she heard the voice behind her. Well, well, Mrs. Ashford, quite a step up from Miss Merritt, isn't it? Cass turned to find Victor Calder standing there, his smile sharp and dangerous. What are you doing here? She demanded. Just passing through. Heard the interesting news about your sudden marriage. Funny how that happened right after our conversation at the inn. It's none of your business. Oh, but it is. See, I've been asking around, talking to people who know both your families. And you know what I learned? Victor stepped closer, lowering his voice. Nobody knew you two were courting, not a single person, which makes your story about months of secret romance seem a bit suspect. Cass's heart hammered, but she kept her expression neutral. We kept it private. That was the point. Right. So private that even your closest friends had no idea. So private that 3 weeks ago, you were publicly arguing with him at a town meeting about water rights. Victor's eyes gleamed. I also heard about that storm, about how you were both stranded at that inn, alone, unchaperoned. We got married, Cass said through gritted teeth. That's all that matters. Is it? Because I think what matters is that you invented an engagement to save your reputation and then had to make it real when I called your bluff. He paused. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows it. Before Cass could respond, a voice cut through the market noise. Mr. Calder, what a surprise to see you here. Nathaniel appeared beside Cass, his expression pleasant, but his eyes cold. I thought you were heading east. Change of plans. Victor's smile didn't waver. I realized I had unfinished business here. Business, Nathaniel repeated. Is that what you call spreading lies about my wife? Lies? Victor laughed. I'm just sharing observations, asking questions. If people draw their own conclusions, well, that's not my fault. Actually, it is. Nathaniel's voice went hard. Slander is a serious offense, and I have witnesses who heard you attempting to blackmail us at that inn, trying to extort money in exchange for your silence. Victor's expression flickered. You can't prove that, can't I? Garrett Murphy would be happy to testify. So would the innkeeper. So would half a dozen other people who saw you harassing us. Nathaniel stepped closer. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave town. Today. And you're going to stop spreading rumors about my wife and my marriage. Because if you don't, I will bury you in legal proceedings that will drain every cent you have. You don't have that kind of power anymore, Victor shot back. Your father disowned you, remember? You're nobody now. True. I don't have my father's money. Nathaniel smiled, and it was sharp as a blade. But I still have his lawyers, and they're very good at what they do. Want to test them? For the first time, uncertainty crossed Victor's face. He looked between Nathaniel and Cass, clearly recalculating. This isn't over, he said finally. Yes, Nathaniel said quietly. It is. Victor stalked away, disappearing into the crowd. Cass released a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Thank you, she said. He won't stop, Nathaniel said grimly. Not completely, but I can make it expensive enough that he'll think twice. Will your father's lawyers actually help you after what happened? They're my lawyers too. I've worked with them for years. They're loyal to me, not just to the Ashford name. He turned to look at her. We're going to be all right, Cassandra. I promise. She wanted to believe him, but as they walked through the market together, she could feel the weight of curious stares, hear the whispers starting. The town was watching, judging, waiting to see if this impossible marriage would survive. That night there was a knock at the door of the small house Nathaniel had rented. He couldn't stay at his father's estate, and Cass's family home was too small. When Nathaniel opened it, Garrett Murphy stood there, travel-worn but grinning. Heard you might need a witness, he said, for those legal proceedings you mentioned. Behind him stood 3 other men from the inn, traders, trappers, people who'd been there for the wedding. We don't take kindly to blackmailers, one of them said, and we don't like seeing good people harassed. So if you need statements, testimonies, whatever, we're here. Nathaniel looked stunned. You came all this way? Weren't that far off our roots anyway, Garrett said with a shrug. Besides, we like a good underdog story. And you two? You're definitely underdogs right now. They spent the evening collecting formal statements, documenting everything Victor had said and done at the inn. By the time the men left, promising to return if needed for any court proceedings, Nathaniel and Cass had a stack of sworn testimonies that would make it nearly impossible for Victor to claim innocence. I can't believe they did that, Cass said after they'd gone. Neither can I. Nathaniel was staring at the documents like they were something precious. We barely knew them. Maybe that's why. They had no reason to lie, no agenda. They just saw what happened and chose to stand up for us. Nathaniel looked at her. People are starting to believe us. The story, the marriage, it's becoming real to them. It is real, Cass said. I know. But now others are seeing it too. Over the next few days, something shifted. Small things at first. The baker who smiled at them instead of frowning. The seamstress who congratulated Cass on her marriage. The shopkeeper who asked Nathaniel about his plans now that he'd left his father's business. Not everyone was friendly. Richard Ashford's influence ran deep, and plenty of people sided with him, viewing Nathaniel's choice as foolish and Cass as an opportunist. But there were others, more than Cass had expected, who seemed charmed by the story, by the idea of enemies becoming lovers, of 2 people choosing each other despite the odds. The turning point came a week after their return, at the monthly town meeting. Nathaniel and Cass arrived together, knowing they'd face hostile questions. Sure enough, as soon as the formal business concluded, Richard Ashford stood. I'd like to address the matter of my son's recent decision, he said, his voice carrying across the hall. His marriage to Miss Merritt, Mrs. Ashford, was conducted in haste, without proper consideration of the implications for either family. Murmurs of agreement. Cass felt Nathaniel tense beside her. I believe this marriage should be examined more closely, Richard continued, to ensure it wasn't conducted under duress or false pretenses. Before Nathaniel could respond, Cass's father stood. Everyone turned to look at him in surprise. With respect, Richard, my daughter is of legal age and sound mind. She made her choice freely. Thomas, surely you can't approve of this union. I didn't say I approved. Her father's voice was hard. I said she made her choice. And unlike some people in this room, I respect my daughter's autonomy enough to support her decisions, even when I don't agree with them. The room went silent. Richard's face flushed. Then Garrett Murphy, who'd stayed in town specifically for this meeting, stood up. I was there when they got married, he said, at that inn during the storm. And I can tell you, there was nothing false about those vows. I've seen a lot of things in my years on the road, but I've never seen 2 people look at each other the way those 2 did that night. Another trader stood. I was there too, can confirm. Whatever their history, those 2 chose each other, fair and square. More voices joined in. Not just the travelers from the inn, but townspeople who'd known Cass and Nathaniel for years. People who'd watched them fight and argue and clash, and who now saw something different. They're good for each other, someone called out. Balance each other out. Better match than half the couples in this town, another voice added. Richard tried to regain control, but the tide had turned. The room was buzzing with conversation, with people defending Cass and Nathaniel's right to marry who they chose. Finally, the town magistrate stood. Richard, I understand your concerns, But unless you have evidence of coercion or fraud, this is a private family matter. The marriage is legal and binding. I suggest you make your peace with it." Richard sat down, his expression thunderous. But he was beaten, and everyone knew it. After the meeting, people came up to congratulate them. Some were genuinely warm, others just curious, but the hostility had shifted. They weren't outcasts anymore. They were a story, a romance that the town was starting to embrace. As they walked home through the darkening streets, Cass felt something loosen in her chest, something that had been clenched tight since the moment they'd left that inn. "We did it," she said quietly. "We actually did it." "We're not done yet," Nathaniel warned. "My father isn't going to give up that easily." "No, but we won today. In front of the whole town, we won." Nathaniel stopped walking, pulled her close. "We won because you were brave enough to take the leap with me, because you didn't back down when it got hard." "Neither did you. You gave up everything for this." "Not everything." His hand cupped her face. "I gained you. That's worth more than anything I lost." Cass kissed him there, in the middle of the street, not caring who saw. And when she pulled back, she saw it in his eyes, the same certainty she felt. This wasn't a lie anymore. Wasn't a performance or a desperate measure. This was real. Hard-won, battle-tested, and absolutely real. And for the first time since that storm had trapped them together, Cass let herself believe they might actually make it. The belief lasted 3 days. Then Richard Ashford made his move. Cass was at the market when she heard the news. A clerk from the land office found her, his face apologetic and worried. "Mrs. Ashford, I thought you should know your father's property deed is being challenged. Mr. Richard Ashford filed a claim this morning saying the boundary markers were improperly surveyed 20 years ago. He's demanding a resurvey and potential forfeiture of the disputed acres." Cass's blood went cold. "That's half our farmland." "I know, ma'am. I'm sorry." She found Nathaniel at the lawyer's office, already poring over documents. He looked up when she burst in, his expression grim. "You heard. Your father is trying to destroy my family because you married me." Her voice shook with fury. "This is retaliation." "Yes." Nathaniel stood, his jaw tight. "And it's legal. Technically, those boundary markers were never properly certified. My father's been sitting on this information for years, waiting for the right moment to use it. So what do? We fight. We prove the markers were valid, or we find another legal angle." He paused. "But Cassandra, this is going to get ugly. My father won't play fair. He never has." Cass sank into a chair. "My parents are going to lose everything, and it's my fault." "It's not your fault, it's his." Nathaniel came around the desk, knelt in front of her. "He's doing this to punish me, to prove that choosing you was a mistake." "Maybe it was." "Don't." His hands gripped hers. "Don't give him that power. We knew there would be consequences. We just have to be stronger than he expects." But over the next week, it became clear that Richard's strategy was more comprehensive than a simple land grab. He was systematically cutting off every avenue of support. Suppliers who'd done business with Cass's family suddenly had scheduling conflicts. The bank that held their modest loan called it in early. People who'd been friendly at the town meeting started avoiding eye contact. Richard was demonstrating his power, showing the town what happened when you crossed him. Nathaniel tried everything: legal challenges, negotiations, appeals to mutual business contacts. But his father had been building his empire for 30 years. He had connections everywhere, favors owed, pressure points he could exploit. "We're not going to win this through conventional means," Nathaniel said one night, staring at yet another rejected petition. "My father controls too much of the system." Cass looked at him across their small kitchen table. He looked exhausted, defeated in a way she'd never seen before. "Then we find unconventional means," she said. "Like what?" An idea was forming, dangerous, possibly stupid, but it was all they had left. "Your father's power comes from his business relationships, right? From people owing him favors depending on his capital?" "Yes. So? So what if we gave them an alternative? Someone they could do business with who doesn't come with all the baggage and demands your father attaches?" Nathaniel frowned. "You mean start a competing business? Cassandra, we don't have the capital for that. My father cut me off, remember? We don't need his capital. We have something better." She leaned forward. "We have credibility." Everyone in this town has watched us fight for our marriage, watched us refuse to back down. They've seen us be honest when we could have lied, stand firm when we could have run. That's worth something. It's worth goodwill. It's not worth money. Isn't it? Cass stood, pacing. Think about it. Half the merchants in town are tired of your father's strong-arm tactics. They deal with him because they have to, not because they want to. But if we offered them fair terms, reasonable rates, partnerships instead of one-sided contracts, they'd still need capital to operate. Equipment, supplies, transportation, which we could help them secure, not as lenders, but as facilitators. We find investors from outside your father's network, people who want to break into this market but have been shut out by his monopoly. Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment, his expression shifting from skeptical to considering. It could work, he said slowly, if we could get enough people on board, create a cooperative network that doesn't rely on any single power player. Exactly. Your father's strength is also his weakness. He controls everything, which means everyone resents him. We just have to give them a viable alternative. This is going to take time, and your parents' land will be lost if we don't act, so we move fast. We start talking to people tomorrow. They spent the next 2 weeks in a whirlwind of meetings. Cass talked to merchants, farmers, small business owners, people who'd been squeezed by Richard's dominance but saw no way out. Nathaniel reached out to his contacts from before the disownment, investors and traders who respected his business acumen even if they disagreed with his personal choices. The response was better than they'd hoped. Not everyone was willing to take the risk, but enough were interested to make it viable. A grain merchant tired of Richard's price fixing, a freight company that wanted to expand but couldn't get fair rates, 3 farmers who'd been locked out of the best markets by Ashford-controlled distribution. Within 3 weeks, they had the framework for something unprecedented, a business cooperative where members pooled resources, shared risks, and made decisions collectively rather than bowing to one dominant power. They called it the Frontier Alliance. Richard's response was swift and brutal. He pulled contracts, called in debts, spread rumors that the alliance was a scheme to defraud honest businessmen. He went to the town council and demanded they refuse to certify the cooperative's business license. That's when Cass's father made his second public stand. The council meeting was packed. Everyone knew this was the decisive moment. If the alliance was denied certification, it would collapse before it even started. Richard had the votes lined up. The council chairman was his golf partner. 2 other members owed him money. But Thomas Merritt stood up before the vote could be called. "I have something to say." The chairman frowned. "Thomas, this isn't the time." "It's exactly the time." Thomas's voice was steady. 3 weeks ago, I stood here and said my daughter made her own choice. I said I'd support her, even though I didn't agree with it. Well, I'm here to say I was wrong. Cass felt her heart sink. Her father was going to denounce them publicly. "I was wrong," Thomas continued, "to think I didn't agree with it. I've watched my daughter and her husband these past weeks. I've seen them fight for something they believe in. I've seen them stand up to power and intimidation. And I've realized that what they're building, this alliance, is exactly what this town needs." Murmurs rippled through the room. Richard's expression went dark. "My land is being stolen," Thomas said bluntly, "by Richard Ashford, using legal technicalities and political pressure. And why? Because his son had the audacity to choose love over dynasty. Because his son refused to let his father control his life." He turned to face Richard directly. "You've built an empire, Richard, but you've built it on fear and obligation, not loyalty or respect. And now your own son is showing us there's a better way. A way where people work together instead of being crushed under one man's boot." Thomas sat down. The room was silent. Then Cass's mother stood. "I support my husband, and I support the alliance." Another farmer stood. Then a merchant. Then more. A cascade of people rising to their feet in support. The chairman looked panicked. "We still need to vote." "Then let's vote," one of the council members said. She was a woman Richard had overlooked, thinking her vote was secure. "I vote to certify the Frontier Alliance as a legal business cooperative." "I second that," said another member, a shopkeeper who'd been quietly listening. "Motion carries." The chairman sputtered. "You can't just—" "We haven't discussed—" "Motion carries," the shopkeeper repeated firmly. "The alliance is certified." Richard stood, his face purple with rage. "This is not over. I will fight this in every court, And you'll lose, Nathaniel said, standing to face his father. Because you're fighting the wrong battle. This isn't about business anymore. It's about whether one person gets to control an entire community or whether people have the right to choose their own path. You're a fool, Richard hissed. You threw away everything for a woman who's brought you nothing but trouble. She brought me purpose. Nathaniel's voice rang clear. She brought me integrity. She brought me the courage to stand up to you. I'd say that's worth considerably more than a spot in your company. Richard's hands clenched into fists. For a moment, Cass thought he might actually strike his son. Instead, he turned and stormed out of the hall, his remaining supporters trailing behind him. The room erupted in conversation. People crowding around Cass and Nathaniel, asking questions about the alliance, offering support, sharing their own grievances with Richard's business practices. In the chaos, Cass's father appeared beside them. I meant what I said in there, he told Nathaniel. You're good for my daughter, better than I gave you credit for. Nathaniel looked stunned. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. You've got a hell of a fight ahead of you. Richard won't give up easy. I know. But you won't be fighting alone. Thomas extended his hand. You've got family now, and we protect our own. Nathaniel shook his hand, and Cass saw something pass between them. Understanding, respect. The beginning of something that might eventually become affection. Over the next month, the Frontier Alliance grew faster than anyone had predicted. Businesses joined. Farmers consolidated resources. The cooperative negotiated better shipping rates, fair prices, more equitable terms. People who'd been barely surviving under Richard's system started thriving. And Richard fought back with everything he had. He tried legal challenges, all of which failed. He tried undercutting the alliance's prices, but he couldn't sustain losses long enough to outlast a network of businesses supporting each other. He tried turning suppliers against them, but the alliance had diversified its supply chain specifically to prevent that vulnerability. Every attack failed, every scheme backfired, and slowly Richard's empire began to crack. The final blow came from an unexpected source. Victor Calder reappeared 6 weeks after the alliance's certification, looking rough and desperate. He found Nathaniel outside the alliance's new office, a modest building that had once been an abandoned warehouse. I need to talk to you, Victor said. I have nothing to say to you. Just listen, please. Victor's usual smugness was gone. Your father approached me 3 weeks ago, offered me money to dig up dirt on you and your wife. Anything that could be used to discredit you, challenge the marriage, destroy the alliance. Nathaniel's expression went cold. And I took the job. I'm not proud of it, but I needed the money. Victor looked away. But I couldn't find anything. Everything you've said, everything you've claimed, it all checks out. The marriage is real. The alliance is legitimate. You're exactly who you appear to be. Why are you telling me this? Because your father doesn't care. Victor's voice was bitter. When I told him I couldn't find any dirt, he told me to fabricate something, manufacture evidence, create false witnesses. He offered me triple the original payment to destroy you, truth be damned. Nathaniel went very still. And what did you say? I said no. Victor laughed harshly. First time in my life I've turned down easy money, but I've done a lot of questionable things, Ashford. I've bent the truth, exploited situations, taken advantage of desperate people, but I won't completely fabricate lies to destroy someone's life. That's where I draw the line. He pulled out an envelope and handed it to Nathaniel. That's everything. The offer from your father, the terms he proposed, his instructions to create false evidence, all documented. Do with it what you will. Why? Nathaniel asked. Why help us now? Victor shrugged. Maybe I'm tired of being the villain, or maybe I'm just tired. Either way, you deserve to know what you're up against. He walked away before Nathaniel could respond. That night, Nathaniel showed the documents to Cass and his lawyer. They sat in stunned silence as they read Richard's detailed instructions, not just to discredit Nathaniel, but to destroy the entire alliance through manufactured scandals and fraudulent accusations. This is criminal, the lawyer said. Conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted defamation, possibly more. We could bring charges. Would they stick? Cass asked. With Victor's testimony and these documents? Absolutely. Nathaniel was quiet, staring at his father's handwriting on the incriminating papers. Don't do it, Cass said quietly. He looked up. What? Don't press charges. Don't destroy him. After everything he's done? He tried to steal your family's land. He's trying to obliterate everything we've built. I know. But if you destroy him, you become him. You use power to crush someone weaker, just like he's always done. Cass took his hand. We don't need to destroy him. We just need to stop him. How? By winning so completely that he has no choice but to accept it. The lawyer frowned. I'm not sure I understand. Show him the documents, Cass said. Let him know we have them. That we could destroy him if we wanted to. Then offer him a choice. Retreat gracefully or face the consequences. He won't retreat, Nathaniel said. That's not who he is. Then we make the consequences clear enough that even his pride can't ignore them. They scheduled a meeting with Richard at his office. He agreed, probably expecting another attempt at negotiation he could reject. Instead, Nathaniel laid the documents on his father's desk without a word. Richard read them, his face going gray. When he looked up, there was fear in his eyes for the first time Cass had ever seen. Where did you get these? From the man you tried to hire to destroy us, Nathaniel said calmly. Turns out he has more integrity than you do. This is fabricated. I never... Don't. Nathaniel's voice was cold. We both know it's real. We have Victor's testimony. We have your signature. We have enough evidence to send you to prison for fraud and conspiracy. Richard slumped in his chair. What do you want? I want you to stop. Immediately. Drop the claim on the Merritt land. Cease all actions against Alliance members. Stop interfering with our business. And if I don't, then we file charges. These documents become public record. Every business partner, every investor, every person who's ever trusted you will see exactly what kind of man you are. Nathaniel leaned forward. Your empire is built on reputation and trust. What happens when everyone knows you're willing to fabricate evidence to destroy your enemies? The silence stretched out. Richard looked old suddenly, diminished. You'd actually do it, he said finally. You'd actually destroy your own father. You've been trying to destroy your son for 2 months, Cass said quietly. What makes you think he owes you mercy? Richard's gaze cut to her, hostile and hurt all at once. This is your doing. You turned him against me. No, Nathaniel said firmly. You did that yourself. The moment you put business above family. The moment you decided your authority mattered more than my happiness. I turned against the person you've become, Father, not because of Cassandra, because of you. For a long moment, Richard just sat there. Then he reached for a pen and paper. I'll draft the withdrawal of the land claim today. I'll instruct my people to cease all interference with Alliance operations. And, Nathaniel prompted, and I'll leave you alone, both of you. Richard's voice was bitter. You've won. Congratulations. This isn't about winning, Nathaniel said quietly. It's about building something better than the system you created, something based on cooperation instead of domination. That system made you everything you are. No. It made me everything you wanted me to be. There's a difference. They left Richard's office with the signed agreement. Outside, Cass felt something enormous settle in her chest. It was over. Really, truly over. We did it, she said. Nathaniel pulled her close. We survived. More than that. We won. Did we? He looked back at his father's building. Feels more like we just refused to lose. Isn't that the same thing? I don't know anymore. He turned to her. But I know I don't regret any of it. Not one single moment. Not even when you thought we were going to freeze to death in that inn? Especially not that. He smiled, and it was genuine and warm and completely without the careful control he'd worn when they first met. That storm was the best thing that ever happened to me. 3 months later, the Frontier Alliance was thriving. 23 businesses had joined, with more applying every week. They'd negotiated regional supply contracts that gave small operators the same leverage as Richard's company. They'd established a credit union so members could access capital without predatory terms. They'd even started a training program, teaching young people business skills so they wouldn't be dependent on established powers. Richard kept his word. He stayed away, focused on managing his diminishing empire. Some of his former partners had defected to the alliance. Others had simply started demanding better terms. His stranglehold on the region's economy was broken, and Thomas Merritt's land was secure, the deed properly certified and beyond challenge. Cass and Nathaniel's small rented house had been replaced by a modest property near her parents' farm. Not grand like the Ashford estate, but comfortable in theirs. They'd built it together, literally. Nathaniel had surprised her by being surprisingly competent with a hammer. It was there, on a clear spring evening, that Cass's mother found them in the garden. "There's someone here to see you both," she said, her expression carefully neutral. Richard Ashford stood in the doorway, looking uncomfortable and out of place. He was thinner than Cass remembered, his face lined with new wrinkles. "I won't stay long," he said stiffly. "I just wanted to see how you were doing." "We're well," Nathaniel said, his voice guarded. "The alliance is successful. Cassandra's family is thriving." "I heard." Richard shifted his weight. "I also heard that there's going to be a child." Cass's hand went instinctively to her still flat stomach. They'd only just confirmed it, hadn't told anyone yet. "How did you know?" she asked. "I still have some sources." A ghost of his old authority, then it faded. "I came to congratulate you, and to apologize." The word hung in the air. Nathaniel stared at his father like he'd spoken a foreign language. "Apologize." "I was wrong." Richard's voice was rough, unpracticed at admitting fault. "About you, about the marriage, about all of it. I thought I was protecting the family legacy. I thought I was teaching you to prioritize correctly, but I was just controlling, demanding, unwilling to accept that you might know what you needed better than I did." "Yes," Nathaniel said simply. "You were all of those things." "I know." Richard looked at Cass. "And you. I tried to destroy your family because you had the audacity to love my son. I'm ashamed of that." Cass didn't know what to say. This broken, humbled version of Richard was so different from the imperious man who'd tried to crush them. "What do you want from us?" she asked finally. "Nothing. I don't deserve anything." Richard paused. "But I'm asking anyway. When the child comes, I'd like to know them. Not as Richard Ashford, the businessman, but as their grandfather, if you'll allow it." Nathaniel and Cass exchanged a look. Months of communication compressed into a single glance. She saw her own conflicted feelings reflected in his eyes, anger and hurt, but also something softer. The possibility of forgiveness, the chance to build something new from the ashes of what had been destroyed. "We'll think about it," Nathaniel said finally. "That's all I can promise right now." "That's more than I expected." Richard turned to leave, then stopped. "For what it's worth, you were right. About building something better. The alliance is a good thing. I wish I'd seen that sooner." After he left, Cass and Nathaniel stood in silence for a long moment. "Do you think he means it?" she asked. "I don't know. Maybe." Nathaniel pulled her close. "But it doesn't matter. We don't need his approval anymore. We stopped needing it the moment we chose each other. Still, it would be nice for the baby to have a grandfather." "It would." He rested his hand over hers on her stomach. "We'll figure it out, together, like everything else." 6 months later, the Alliance held its first anniversary celebration. The warehouse office had been expanded, decorated with banners and lights. Nearly 100 people crowded inside, members, supporters, families. Cass stood at the front, her pregnancy now obvious, and looked out at the faces, her parents beaming with pride. Garrett Murphy, who'd traveled back just for the occasion. The merchants and farmers who'd taken a risk on an untested idea. And Nathaniel beside her, his hand in hers, steady and sure. "A year ago," she said, her voice carrying across the room, "we were told this wouldn't work, that cooperation was naive, that one person or one family had to hold power for the system to function. They were wrong," Nathaniel continued. "Not because we're special or smarter or more deserving, but because we were willing to try something different, to trust each other instead of controlling each other. The alliance isn't perfect," Cass added. "We've made mistakes. We've had disagreements. We'll make more mistakes and have more disagreements in the future. But we'll face them together," Nathaniel said, "as partners, as equals, because that's what works. Not domination, not fear. Partnership." The room erupted in applause. People stood, cheering, celebrating not just the alliance's success, but what it represented. Proof that there was another way. That power didn't have to corrupt. That people could choose cooperation over competition, and not just survive, but thrive. In the back of the room, partially hidden, Richard Ashford stood watching. When he caught Nathaniel's eye, he nodded once. Not approval exactly, more like acknowledgement, recognition that his son had built something he never could have. After the celebration wound down, Cass and Nathaniel walked home through the quiet streets. Spring had arrived fully, bringing warmth and new growth. The town looked different than it had 6 months ago, more prosperous, more confident. The alliance's success had rippled outward, touching everything. "Do you ever think about that storm?" Cass asked. "About how we ended up here?" "Every day," Nathaniel smiled. "Best blizzard I ever got trapped in. We could have died, you know, if we tried to travel in that weather. We could have, but we didn't. We survived, and then we did more than survive." They reached their house, lights glowing warm in the windows. Home. "Do you think they'll tell stories about us?" Cass asked. "Years from now, will people remember the enemies who became lovers, who built something new? Maybe. Or maybe they'll just remember that change is possible, that you don't have to accept the way things are." He turned to face her, cupping her face in his hands. "Either way, I don't care. Because I'll remember. I'll remember every moment, the fear, the fights, the impossible choices. And I'll remember that choosing you was the easiest decision I ever made." "Liar," Cass said, but she was smiling. "It was the hardest decision of your life." "Hardest to make," he agreed. "Easiest to live with." She kissed him there, under the stars, in front of the home they'd built together. And for a moment everything else faded. The alliance, the past feuds, the future uncertainties. There was just this. Two people who'd started as enemies, become reluctant allies, transformed into partners, and somehow, impossibly, found love in the wreckage. The storm that had trapped them had also set them free. Free from expectations, from the paths others had laid out for them, from the belief that they had to accept things as they were. They'd chosen differently, chosen each other, chosen to build something new. And in the harsh, unforgiving frontier where survival was never guaranteed, where one wrong choice could cost you everything, they'd proven that sometimes the greatest act of courage wasn't fighting the storm. It was standing in the eye of it with the person you'd chosen and refusing to let go. Years later, when their children asked how they'd fallen in love, Cass and Nathaniel would laugh and tell them about a blizzard, a lie that became truth, and the moment they'd stopped pretending and started believing. They'd tell them that love wasn't always a gentle thing. Sometimes it was forged in desperation and tempered by adversity. Sometimes it started with animosity and ended with devotion. Sometimes the person who challenged you the most was exactly the person you needed. And sometimes, in the harshest environments, where survival belonged to the strongest and the smartest and the most ruthless, sometimes it also belonged to those brave enough to choose love over power, partnership over domination, and each other over everything else the world offered. The Frontier Alliance would continue to grow, would spread to other regions, would become a model for cooperative business that challenged the old order. Richard Ashford would eventually reconcile with his son, would become a doting grandfather, would spend his final years trying to undo the damage of his earlier choices. But none of that mattered as much as this moment. Cass and Nathaniel, hand in hand, walking into the home they'd built, ready to face whatever came next. Together. Because that's what they'd chosen, what they'd fought for, what they'd proven was possible, even when everyone said it wasn't. And in a world that tried to force people into predetermined roles, that tried to dictate who you could love and who you should be, that small act of defiance, choosing each other, choosing partnership, choosing love, was its own kind of revolution. The storm had passed long ago, but what it had created, what they had created together, would last forever.